Chapter 611. Who are we going to deal with this time? Mission? Well, I'll also go with you. That girl of the fallen angel clan became overjoyed. This sudden change in her mood left Yi Shiwen amazed. By the way, my name is Yi Shiwen. I haven't asked your name yet? Yi Shiwen asked. My name is Ling Fei. The girl of the fallen angel clan replied. But you can't do this. Everyone on my side is human. You look like this. So, people will recognize you. Yi Shiwen frowned as he looked at that pair of gray wings at the back of Ling Fei's body. The fallen angel's appearance made it seem that there wasn't much difference between them and the humans. However, it was that pair of wings behind their bodies that made them appear different from humans. It might be possible that quite many people didn't know about the fallen angel clan. However, it didn't mean that nobody knew about them. And it would be very troublesome if anyone recognized her. This is simple. Check this out. Ling Fei's delicate body shook. That pair of wings behind her body turned smaller and smaller until they finally retracted into her body. Let's go now. Ling Fei's cheerful laughter reverberated inside the forest. Endless clouds were rolling in the sky. It seemed as if they had been dyed in black. One couldn't see beyond even if their gaze penetrated deep inside the clouds. It was all black. There was no daylight. The majority of areas inside the devil world were like this. It was said that there was a devil's sun hanging in the sky right at the center of the devil world. And this sun hadn't set for years. It was the source of energy for everything in the devil world. A crackling sound was heard. The flames swallowed the woods, and a crisp sound was issued. The sound seemed louder and clearer in this dark night. The bursts of light smoke that rose from the burning woods flew towards the sky in spirals. A burst of fragrance spread in the entire mountain forest. The fragrance of delicious food permeated the entire place and spread far away. Fortunately, all the devil beasts had already been driven away from inside this mountain forest. Therefore, this fragrance didn't attract any devil beast. 2 washed and peeled rabbits were hanging on 2 twigs which had been placed above a bonfire. The flesh of the rabbits gradually became golden as the flame roasted them. Drops of oil congealed into droplets and fell into the fire. This ignited the flames further. Yi Shiwen was roasting the rabbits by slowly turning the twigs. The fragrance in the air was becoming increasingly strong. He had been turning the branches for a long time now. However, it was simply nothing for him. It wouldn't matter to him even if he had to keep turning them until the end of time. It was very easy for him as long as he had this kind of patience. On the other side, the girl of the fallen angel clan had become impatient after having waited for a long time. She asked, "Can't we eat now? It's almost done." Yi Shiwen replied. He shot a glance at Ling Fei as he replied. "It's not done yet? It looks well cooked." Ling Fei pointed towards the golden and oily external skin of those 2 rabbits. "Not yet. It may look good on the outside. However, it hasn't roasted from inside yet." Yi Shiwen's current perception was extremely keen. He knew whether the rabbits had cooked or not by just having a glance at them. It's such a pain." Ling Fei once again pouted her tender red lips and complained. "Getting impatient, are we?" Yi Shiwen said with a smile. He hadn't barbecued in the wild like this for a long time. This was because he didn't need to eat anything in order to replenish his energy due to his cultivation. After all, he could replenish his energy just by absorbing the spirit energies from the environment. Xiaoya was sitting quietly on the side. She wasn't far from Yi Shiwen. She was watching Yi Shiwen and Ling Fei. It seemed as if there was nothing in this world that could faze her. She was calm and composed even in the devil world. Perhaps it was because she had gone through so much by now that nothing could faze her anymore. She would only have a smile on her small face whenever she looked at Yi Shiwen. 10 years had passed. However, she still looked the same as when Yi Shiwen had met her for the first time. There was no change at all. The only thing that had changed was her strength. She had entered the truth realm. In fact, she had already reached to the peak of the truth realm. She would soon enter the legendary realm. This speed wasn't as fast as that of Pang Yongbo and other such geniuses. However, Yi Shiwen felt that it was fast enough since Xiaoya didn't have the support of a large amount of resources like Pang Yangbo had. Xiaoya had cultivated to this extent within a short time of 10 years depending solely upon her ability. This was enough to make Yi Shiwen admire her. Ling Fei felt quite bored. So, she walked over to Xiaoya and pinched her small face. It wouldn't be strange to say that Xiaoya was shy in front of people apart from Yi Shiwen. In fact, she wouldn't get close to them. However, it was different in Ling Fei's case. Xiaoya was quiet in front of Ling Fei. However, Yi Shiwen felt that the fact that Xiaoya was willing to let Ling Fei get close to her was still a big miracle. Yi Shiwen asked Xiaoya about this secretly. And Xiaoya had merely replied, "This young miss somehow makes me feel intimate." Yi Shiwen clearly knew that a child like Xiaoya couldn't tell who was good towards her and who wasn't just by looking at them. But she could tell it by instinctively feeling their intention. She could naturally see this more clearly as compared to an ordinary person. Well, I'll pass. Yi Shiwen had finally cooked the rabbit meat. All three individuals ate heartily. Yi Shiwen and Xiaoya just tasted. After all, the two ate one rabbit put together. However, Ling Fei of the Fallen Angel clan ate a rabbit alone. But she still wasn't satisfied. She argued noisily, went to grab a few more rabbits, and asked Yi Shiwen to roast them for her. Whoosh! A golden light cut through the vast sky. A talisman carrying a message broke through the layers of space and fell into Yi Ziwen's hands. Come at once. There were only 3 words. However, Yi Shiwen saw the name written on the message. It was by Jing Wei. Yi Shiwen still had a good opinion about Bai Jing Wei. Yi Shiwen had told him to send a summon signal for him when they needed to act together. A few months had passed, and no message had arrived. So, Yi Shiwen had almost forgotten about that matter. However, it must be a big operation now that the message had finally arrived. A burst of devil wind whistled in the mountains as Yi Shiwen swept past them. Yi Shiwen was flying in the sky as fast as lightning. Ling Fei was also flying beside him quite freely. She didn't fall behind him. She would shout and complain from time to time. It seemed as if she had never flown in the sky before. An outsider would believe that their speed was very fast. After all, their speed was as fast as lightning. However, these individuals weren't even flying at their top speed yet. Yi Shiwen hadn't revealed his devil wings, and Ling Fei had retracted her angel wings. Angel wings. They were going to meet Bai Jing Wei and other humans. Therefore, the two individuals couldn't reveal anything related to the devil race. Otherwise, other people would find out, and that wouldn't be a good thing. It must be mentioned that it seemed as if Ling Fei's persona had completely changed after she had retracted her devil wings and the devil energy on her body. In fact, she was giving off a pure and holy feeling now. She looked completely different from earlier. Yi Shiwen could easily find the position of Bai Jing Wei and the others under the talisman's guidance. This was the same talisman which had carried the message. Several months had passed. So, many experts had already penetrated deep into the devil world. They had already scattered to faraway places. They were still on the periphery if one were to draw a parallel to the massive size of the devil world. However, they had gone very far away in reality. Yi Shiwen had to fly for 3 days and 3 nights before he came across Bai Jing Wei and the others in a sierra. Bai Jing Wei and the others had obtained some information about some beasts and were exterminating them in these mountains. The devil beasts present inside the devil world were more ferocious than those demon beasts from their own world. The majority of them were in sage realm. So, a semi-sage expert couldn't separate from the group and act solo at this place. These devil beasts were very powerful. However, Bai Jing Wei possessed tyrannical strength. A spear cut across the horizon just like a mountain, and those devil beasts got swept away one after another wherever it went. Bai Jing Wei couldn't be stopped as long as he didn't come across a great sage expert. However, this area could be regarded as a desolate zone of the devil world. So, it wasn't probable for a great sage to appear here. Therefore, every big force would send their disciples here to temper whilst resting assured. Otherwise, a great sage expert was enough to make them vomit blood since the said expert would kill their geniuses. These disciples might not have great importance at present. However, they could grow and become the pillars of their big forces in the future. Therefore, it would be a very big loss for a force if they lost these disciples. In fact, it could be said that they would lose an entire generation of geniuses. Yi Shiwen saw a very tyrannical devil beast of the late stage of half-step great sage realm roaring and attacking. It was the king of the countless devil beasts who lived in these mountains. However, it had now been forced into a disadvantageous position by Bai Jing Wei. Even 100 devil beasts like it couldn't be a match for him. All of them would get killed by him. Bai Jing Wei's dreadful strength was clearly visible from this. In fact, his points were higher than the countless experts of true martial world who had arrived in the devil world this time. He was in the 9th position. He hadn't obtained the 1st position. However, he had truly stood out among these 100,000 or so experts. He was ranked among the top 10 experts. So, his strength was self-evident. Yi Shiwen couldn't be a match for the present Bai Jing Wei unless he summoned the Star Colossus avatar. It wasn't surprising that Bai Jing Wei had said that he wouldn't get an opportunity to participate in the next Devil World competition. After all, Yi Shiwen could see that he was almost continuously suppressing his aura from rushing out of his body. In fact, he had reached a situation where he was about to enter the Great Sage Realm. "Brother Yi, you've arrived so soon. I don't know who this is." Bai Jing Wei killed that devil beast of late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm, and then came flying over to welcome them. However, he seemed a bit surprised. After all, he had sent that message only recently, but Yi Shiwen had already arrived. It was clear that Yi Ziwen's speed was very fast. It was in fact the same as what he had found out from the information he had received about Yi Shiwen. He had obviously investigated about Yi Ziwen's background since he had invited him to join his group. It wasn't a difficult thing for him to find out Yi Ziwen's roots. This intelligence turned out to be true. Yi Shiwen indeed had an extremely powerful body. But he also had another characteristic. His speed was extremely fast, not many could match his speed. Having an incomparably tyrannical body was enough to rule the entire world. But Yi Shiwen even had incredible speed. "My name is Ling Fei." Ling Fei didn't wait for Yi Shiwen to introduce her. A smile blossomed on her face as she replied. She was a bit excited to see Bai Jing Wei and such a large number of other disciples of the True Martial University. After all, it was the first time that she had seen so many humans gathered at one place. Therefore, it was hard for her to curb her excitement. "Hello, young Miss Ling Fei." Bai Jing Wei replied. "Brother Bai, who are we going to deal with?" Yi Shiwen jumped in and asked. He didn't let Ling Fei speak any further. Otherwise, she might mess things up if she had continued to speak. Chapter 6:12, Brother Bai, who are we going to deal with? The smile disappeared from Bai Jing Wei's face. He then replied, "We have to deal with Shou Kuan of the 10,000 Beasts Villa." "You mean the Shou Kuan who's presently at the 6th position on the merit list?" Yi Shiwen asked incredulously. 10,000 Beasts Villa was a colossus force. However, it was neither located in the central region nor in the southern region. It was located in the far western region instead. They had been ruling the majority of western region for many years. However, the True Martial University's disciples knew about the 10,000 Beasts Villa because the conflict between the True Martial University and the 10,000 Beasts Villa wasn't just a day or two old. In fact, one would find that the 10,000 Beasts Villa was a part of the True Martial University if they traced its roots. However, it was called 10,000 Beasts Hall back then. It was a subordinate wing of the True Martial University and had an outstanding reputation inside the university. It could be said that 70% to 80% of the battle-type spirit beasts of the True Martial University were nurtured by the 10,000 Beasts Hall back then. So, they had a pivotal position in the True Martial University. However, the Lord of the 10,000 Beasts Hall was an ambitious person. He had carried most of the 10,000 Beasts Hall's experts far away to the western region, and had established the 10,000 Beasts Villa after the True Martial University had gradually declined. The 10,000 Beasts Villa had slowly developed with the passage of time. And it had now become an illustrious force in the true martial world. The 10,000 Beasts Hall had suddenly declined in the university after these elites had left. Consequently, this top-notch force had suddenly fallen behind many others. It had gone from being an outstanding inheritance in the true martial university to an imitation of its past self. It had simply become worthless. In fact, many disciples of the true martial university might not even know that the 10,000 Beasts Hall had ever existed in the university. The most authentic method of managing the beasts had also been taken away by the 10,000 Beasts Villa. Therefore, the remaining force had become a shell. The disciples of the true martial university hated the 10,000 Beasts Villa countless times more than the Xianyuan Palace Hall, even though the latter had been opposing the true martial university endlessly. Therefore, a battle of life or death was certain to break out between the true martial university and the 10,000 Beasts Villa if they came across each other. These were old grudges. However, there was a new enmity apart from these old grudges. After all, the 10,000 Beasts Villa had been trying to move southwards over the last few years. It wanted to expand its force in the entire southern region. The 10,000 Beasts Villa had split out from the true martial university. So, it had many spies in the southern region. These spies had been lurking for hundreds, or more than 1,000, or maybe even more than 10,000 years. But they had remained silent the entire time. However, they had unceasingly launched attacks after the 10,000 Beasts Villa had decided to enter the southern region. And this had given the true martial university a headache. A major war had never taken place between the two sides. However, small skirmishes had been happening unceasingly between the core disciples of the Sage Realm. New enmity, plus old grudges. How could they not wish to kill each other? Yi Shiwen also got a headache when he thought of this. The true martial university had many enemies. However, every current big force hadn't been a subordinate of the true martial university back then. They had basically been rebels back in the day. In fact, there were a very few forces who had been sworn enemies of the true martial university in those days. This Shokuin was undoubtedly the most outstanding disciple among all the disciples of the 10,000 Beasts Villa. He was the top-tier expert among all the core disciples. So, he was very famous in the true martial world. His fame was obviously very different from the kind that Yi Shiwen enjoyed. After all, Yi Shiwen was merely a new disciple at this time. He was indeed famous. However, people didn't care about him. After all, a large number of such people used to appear in every 100 years. However, an expert like Shokuin was entirely different. He was a big personality whose name could shake an entire region. On top of that, he was about to enter the Great Sage Realm. He had managed to obtain the 6th position on the merit list. He had even surpassed by Jing Wei. So, his strength was evident from this aspect alone. The ranking on the merit list didn't represent the ultimate ranking of strength. That was because some people were good at fighting alone, while others were expert in fighting in a group. These were two completely different concepts. However, anyone who had broken into top 20 positions or even top 50 positions must be a scary character standing at the peak of the late stage of half-step Great Sage's Age Realm. And this also meant that they could enter the Great Sage Realm at any time. Yeah, it's him. Bai Jingwei replied in a deep voice. A fierce glint flashed in his eyes. This person is quite powerful. However, he's also very shameless. Plus, he ought to be stronger than me. After all, he had reached the peak of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm 1,000 years ago. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but hold his breath as he heard this. Reached the peak of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm 1,000 years ago? Wouldn't he be the same as people like Mu Xingjie and Huang Wuji in terms of cultivation time? However, Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie had reached the Great Sage Realm 1,000 years ago. How is this guy still hovering over the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm? It doesn't make any sense. He was one of the famous Heaven's Pride experts back then. It is said that his accumulation has already completed. However, he hasn't promoted to the Great Sage Realm and has stayed in this realm. It's not the first time or second time that he has participated in the Devil World competition. He comes with an evil scheme for the disciples of our true martial university every time. Many brilliant young disciples of our university have fallen at his hands. In fact, almost all our disciples had been killed by him one time. Bai Jingwei was brimming with murderous aura when he was speaking. Our university has spies in their 10,000 Beasts villa. And those spies believe that this might be the last time that Shou Kun is participating in the Devil World competition. He'll return to the closed-door training and make the breakthrough into Great Sage Realm after the end of the competition. He has excellent background. So, I'm afraid that he will make another breakthrough in quick succession. And this means that he will reach an extremely profound level within the Great Sage Realm if he were allowed to make this breakthrough. Then, I won't be able to deal with him even if I enter the Great Sage Realm as well. Only Brother Huang Wuji or Brother Mu Xingjie might be able to deal with him after that happens. Yi Shiwen nodded. That Shou Kun must have entered the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm 1,000 years ago if this information is correct. How terrifying would it be if his accumulation of 1,000 years burst out at once? He'll be far above an average Great Sage even if he wouldn't be able to contend against people like Mu Xingjie and Huang Wuji. He finally understood why Bai Jingwei was insisting on killing Shou Kun at this time. After all, Shou Kun's cultivation was extremely profound. So, an ordinary expert of late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm might not be able to withstand even a single move from him. However, he was basically still in the half-step Great Sage Realm. It was quite difficult to deal with him. However, it wasn't impossible. However, the disparity between Shou Kun and Bai Jingwei would increase very quickly once Shou Kun entered the Great Sage Realm. After all, Shou Kun's accumulation was 1,000 years ahead of Bai Jingwei. It might not reflect at this time. However, it would manifest once he entered the Great Sage Realm. Therefore, Bai Jingwei might not get another opportunity if he didn't launch an attack at this time. Bai Jingwei was a top-tier Heaven's Pride expert. However, Shou Kun wasn't any less talented. Moreover, he also had an accumulation of almost 1,000 years. Therefore, Bai Jingwei might not get another opportunity to take revenge in his entire lifetime unless a miracle happened. Yi Shiwen clearly knew that Bai Jingwei was loyal and devoted to the university. Any person or force that opposed the university would become a thorn in Bai Jingwei's eyes. And he would wish to kill them with his own hands. He is slaughtering in big numbers since he is participating in the Devil World competition for the last time. A news has recently arrived that more than 5 Heaven's Pride experts have met of violent deaths at his hands. All those experts had been among the top 100 people on the merit list. It is said that his gaze is fixed on our true martial university. Therefore, I have no choice but to attack in advance. I must put him down before he poses any threat to the disciples of our university. Bai Jingwei coldly said. His strength hadn't been enough in the previous Devil World competition. It hadn't been enough to cause any threat to Shou Kun. However, this was the first time that his strength had reached very close to that of Shou Kun. Moreover, it might also be his last opportunity. So, there was no way that he wouldn't give it everything he had. Yi Ziwen's complexion also turned serious. So this is the case. Then, it is necessary to launch an attack on Shou Kun and kill him in advance. Otherwise, it'll be a huge threat for the true martial university's disciples. An ominous glint flickered in Yi Ziwen's eyes. He'll even use the Star Colossus avatar if needed. The 10,000 Beasts Villa excels in the method of controlling the beasts. Brother Bai, we have to first sweep away the devil beasts present in the vicinity. Otherwise, I'm afraid that Shou Kun will make use of these devil beasts. Yi Shiwen said. The 10,000 Beasts Villa had split up from True Martial University's 10,000 Beasts Hall. It had already separated. However, the True Martial University's people were fully aware of the various secret martial arts techniques of the 10,000 Beasts Hall. The scariest one among their techniques was the method of controlling beasts. Therefore, it would be a big disaster if the enemy spotted the devil beasts, ominous beasts, and so on in the vicinity. The enemy had already trained several spirit beasts for battle. Moreover, the other ominous beasts and devil beasts present in the surroundings could also be exploited by them. Those beasts wouldn't be as good as the spirit beasts they had raised and trained in person. However, they still couldn't be underestimated. Bai Jingwei was wiping out those beasts in order to avoid any mishap and to reduce Shou Kun's fighting prowess. Bai Jingwei had been on expeditions for many years, so it could be said that he was very experienced. Therefore, he must thought about these things in advance. Bai Jingwei explained a few things to Yi Shiwen. Then he once again joined his team, which was wiping out the devil beasts. He even expanded the scope of slaughtering this time. What's wrong, Yi Shiwen? Do you need me, your great master? I'll help you. How powerful can an expert of the late stage of half-step great sage realm be? I'll kill him in one slap. Ling Fei brandished her small fist and proudly looked at Yi Shiwen. It seemed from her appearance that she was trying to say, "I'll help you if you need me." Yi Ziwen's face turned dark. He was afraid that Ling Fei might refer to herself as his master in front of everyone. Yi Shiwen hadn't agreed to be her pet. However, Ling Fei would still address herself as his master from time to time. She didn't have any evil intentions behind it. However, it made Yi Shiwen feel at a loss. "I don't need your help." Yi Shiwen shook his head. How could he possibly let Ling Fei fight in front of so many people? He turned around and joined Bai Jingwei's group in wiping out those devil beasts. Not even a day had passed when another familiar figure arrived with a group of people. It was none other than Gao Ling Xiu. She had disappeared for several months. However, she looked even more confident now since she'd had some experience in the devil world. Chapter 613. Mission Exposed. Sister Gao, I haven't seen you for the last few months. Your martial power has advanced very significantly. Congratulations. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands in obeisance and said, Gao Ling Xiu was still in the sage accomplished realm. It appeared that her realm hadn't changed. However, how could her recent progress be concealed from Yi Shiwen? Brother Yi hasn't come across a small change either. Congratulations to you as well. Gao Ling Xiu replied with a smile. She could also see that Yi Shiwen had become even more powerful. The experts who stood behind Gao Ling Xiu also looked at Yi Shiwen somewhat incredulously. After all, they hadn't expected that they would see him alive. Yi Shiwen had refused to join their group back then, and many people had thought that he was overestimating his capabilities. In fact, they believed that he was courting death. However, they saw that Yi Shiwen was alive and well. Moreover, he had clearly become more powerful. This obviously made them a bit depressed. So, he has a hidden trump after all. It's no wonder that he's so haughty. Sister Gao, I feel reassured in my heart since you've arrived. Bai Jingwei smiled and said. Yi Shiwen was a bit surprised. Bai Jingwei has said these words as a courtesy. However, it is clear that he thinks highly of Gao Ling Xiu. In fact, it seems that he considers Gao Ling Xiu as his equal. He clearly isn't treating her like an ordinary sage expert. Yi Shiwen also looked at Gao Ling Xiu's rank on the merit list after he thought this. She had stormed into the top 20 positions. She had obtained the 18th rank. She hadn't made it to the top 10. However, everyone apart from her in the top 100 ranking on the merit list was a peak expert of the late stage of half-step great sage realm. It was clearly visible from this that she had tyrannical strength. As for a nonentity like Yi Shiwen who was ranked among thousands, there was nothing to say. Brother Yi, who is this? Gao Ling Xiu looked at Ling Fei. Ling Fei was beside Yi Shiwen. We want to launch an ambush on Shou Kun this time. So, we must execute this matter secretly. After all, the consequences would be too dire if Shou Kun got even a sniff of it. He might bring a group of 10,000 Beasts Villas people and launch a surprise attack on us instead. There isn't any problem with people who are with Bai Jingwei. Yi Shiwen is also trustworthy. Otherwise, Bai Jingwei wouldn't have called him. However, who is this person beside him? She doesn't look to be from the true martial university. This is... Yi Shiwen had a headache as to how to introduce Ling Fei. He knew Gao Ling Xiu's intention behind asking about Ling Fei. This operation was very confidential. So, not everyone could participate in it. However, Yi Shiwen had been invited. So, this proved that he was a reliable man in their opinion. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had agreed without any hesitation when he had received the invitation. This was also a kind of affirmation that he wouldn't keep himself away from joining the core army of the true martial university forever. He already had a very bad relation with the law enforcement hall. So, it was impossible for him to stay away from joining the main army of the university eternally. He would eventually integrate into them, just like he had fully integrated into the hidden star peak now. His friend, Ling Fei, didn't give Yi Shiwen much time to think. She stepped forward on her own accord and replied. Yi Shiwen could clearly see a smiling expression in Ling Fei's eyes. It was a rather complacent look. My name is Ling Fei. I'm very powerful. Ling Fei waved her small fist to show a sense of strength as she spoke. It seemed as if she wanted to show off her power. However, it was clear that the result wasn't good. Other people didn't believe that Ling Fei was truly a powerful expert by looking at her. She had entered the devil world. So, she obviously wasn't a weakling. However, she didn't look capable enough in front of these elites. Therefore, they didn't pay too much attention to her. She was Yi Ziwen's friend. So, there would surely be no problem. After all, they believed that Yi Shiwen wouldn't be this irresponsible with respect to this matter. He obviously wouldn't have brought along just anyone in confusion. He would have considered everything. Ling Fei became anxious when she saw that nobody believed her. I'm truly very powerful. Very, very powerful. Okay, everyone knows that you're very powerful. Ling Fei was planning to reveal her true strength to prove that her words weren't empty. But Yi Shiwen couldn't stand by idly and watch. He promptly pulled her towards himself and cracked a joke. There would be no pressure on these people who are here on the mission if I let this little devil reveal her powers. According to the news that I've obtained, Shou Kun will pass from here after a few days. We can attack and kill him at that time. I've also invited a member of the Heavenly Punishment faction for this task. Bai Jingwei shot a glance at Yi Shiwen as he said. He felt a bit embarrassed. After all, everyone knew about the conflict between Yi Shiwen and the law enforcement hall. Therefore, it was quite difficult to say that whether they would attack Yi Shiwen or not if they appeared. However, it also wasn't that easy to launch a surprise attack on Shou Kun. An ordinary expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm couldn't match his fighting prowess. So, the Heavenly Punishment faction's fighting prowess would have a very important role in this mission. However, Bai Jingwei had already invited Yi Shiwen before. Therefore, this had formed a huge contradiction. Brother Yi can leave if he feels inconvenienced, Bai Jingwei said. Bai Jingwei would lose a little strength if Yi Shiwen left. However, he would lose a backbone if he lost the Heavenly Punishment faction. He had calculated this thing. However, he believed that nothing was more important than the university. So, he wouldn't hesitate even if Yi Shiwen got offended as a result. I don't mind, Yi Shiwen replied. He was very wary of the Heavenly Punishment faction. However, they wouldn't be able to kill him even if they attacked. So, there was nothing to fear. Bai Jingwei let out a sigh of relief when he saw that Yi Shiwen wasn't bothered about it. He said, Brother Yi is very broad-minded. I want to thank you on behalf of all the disciples of the university. Yi Shiwen promptly replied, It's nothing. Brother Bai needn't do so. Bai Jingwei could lay down his own dignity for the university. So, what could Yi Shiwen complain about? Yi Shiwen could only put aside any grudges that he might have because of Bai Jingwei's decision. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen suddenly became scared. Bursts of evil wind blew down from the sky. A giant claw of a beast fell from the sky to grab everyone. Oh no! Everyone pay attention. There's a danger! Bai Jingwei roared. Everyone else also saw that a giant claw was coming down towards them. Bai Jingwei had the highest martial power among the people here, apart from Ling Fei. Divine beams immediately emitted from his hands and curled everyone in. Then he suddenly retreated a dozen miles along with everyone under his protection and evaded the surprise attack of that giant claw. Rumble! The giant claw smashed down on the ground where everyone had been standing a moment ago. A huge hole was formed, and the space exploded. The might of this claw made everyone terrified. It was hard to imagine. This is White Phoenix Demon Claw. Bai Jingwei's complexion became exceptionally ugly. Shou-kun, come out for me. His mood immediately sank to the bottom. White Phoenix Demon Claw was the martial technique of the 10,000 Beasts Villa. There were certain records of this technique in the True Martial University. As per the rumors, a senior of the 10,000 Beasts Hall had created this technique back in time. He had comprehended this claw technique after he had accidentally gotten involved in a fight with a white phoenix. It was one of the secret techniques of the True Martial University. It wasn't passed on to outsiders. It was a very confidential technique. There weren't many people in the present generation of the 10,000 Beast Villa who had obtained the inheritance of the White Phoenix Demon Claw. In fact, there no one besides Shou-kun who could have the skill to inherit it. Bai Jingwei had made thousands of plans in order to keep this mission a secret. However, it had gotten leaked in the end. In fact, it hadn't just leaked out. Shou-kun had launched a surprise attack in advance, and that too at a time when that member of the Heavenly Punishment faction hadn't arrived. Bai Jingwei was obviously contemptuous towards Shou-kun's character. However, he had never denied his strength. He couldn't dare to say that he would win easily even if he and Gao Ling Xiu attacked him at the same time. Ha ha ha. It's very funny. Bai Jingwei, I hadn't expected that you would dare to scheme against me. A huge figure appeared in the sky. It was a hill-sized ferocious tiger. Its entire body was as white as snow, and a pair of wings were protruding out of its ribs. It was floating in the sky. Its 4 claws vigorously grabbed the sky of the devil world and ripped a huge crack in it. The crack wouldn't restore for a very long time. The scene was exceptionally dreadful. A tall man was standing on the forehead of this giant spirit tiger. He looked to be in his 30s. He was dressed in flashy clothes. His square face was filled with a disdainful expression. Humph! You've dared to attack the disciples of our university. You should have known that this day would come. Bai Jingwei snorted and replied. Someone like you thinks that he can kill me? Do you know who you're talking to? That tall man was Shou-kun. He opened his round eyes wide. He looked a bit sinister. I've heard that you are loyal and devoted to the True Martial University. But you've dared to think of killing me this time? You were a non-entity in the previous Devil World competitions. You were just like an ant in front of me. But you've dared to do this now? It seems that you've grown audacious. Bai Jingwei was ranked 9th on the merit list. However, Shou-kun didn't pay attention to him. Instead, he had treated him like an insignificant non-entity. However, Bai Jingwei had indeed been a non-entity when Shou-kun had become famous in the true martial world. Only people like Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie could be compared to him. He didn't pay attention to other people. What was Bai Jingwei? You're too negligent. You've dared to come alone. You're just an expert of half-step great sage realm even though you've cultivated for many more years than me. Had you thought that you'd come here and just walk away? Bai Jingwei calmly said. Everything had already been seen through. Their target had knocked on their door with the intention of looking for a fight. So, they might as well give it to him. There wasn't enough time to set up matrix formations, and there was very little assurance of their operation's success. However, it didn't mean that there was no chance at all. Humph, who do you think you are? You're just an insignificant youth, and you dare to act presumptuously in front of me. I can eliminate you in one stroke. Shou-kun snorted. He simply disregarded him. He didn't even pay attention to this group of people. They were in the same realm of the late stage of half-step great sage as he was. However, there was a difference of heaven and earth between their strength and his. Brother Shou can surely clean up these small fries alone. However, it would be better if we act quickly. I've heard that a member of the Heavenly Punishment faction is also coming. He might arrive before we're done if we don't act quickly. Suddenly, another brash-sounding voice came from the sky. Chapter 6:14. Yi Shiwen's steps into action. The voice hadn't even faded when a tall and slim figure appeared in front of everyone. He was a middle-aged man, and he was dressed in a magnificent robe. In fact, his clothes looked exceptionally luxurious. Li Yifeng from Xianyuan Palace Hall. Bai Jingwei's eyes turned gloomy as he looked at the man before him. Yi Shiwen had heard that this was another top expert who was placed among the top 20 experts on the merit list. In fact, Li Yifeng of Xianyuan Palace Hall was on the 14th position on the merit list at the moment. So, he was more powerful than Gao Lingxiu. Li Yifeng used to be a Heaven's Pride expert of Xianyuan Palace Hall many years ago. Thereafter, he had reached among the core disciples whilst killing his peers along the way. He was a top figure. He was one of the 2 leading core disciples whom Xianyuan Palace Hall had sent this time. There had been no problem initially since only Shou Kuan had been here. However, everyone's hearts sank with Li Yifeng's arrival. These 2 individuals were more powerful than the combination of Bai Jingwei and Gao Lingxiu. Moreover, there were blurred figures of a dozen or so experts of the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm behind them. They belonged to the 10,000 Beasts Villa and Xianyuan Palace Hall. There weren't many people, only a dozen senior experts. However, the elites of the 2 big forces had come out. It's ridiculous. You've dared to conspire against our brother Shou? Have you ever seen someone scheming against our brother Shou? A disciple of the 10,000 Beasts Villa arrogantly said. He was looking at Bai Jingwei and the others in a manner that made it seem as if he was looking at dead people. I wanted to deal with all of you one by one. However, this is also a good option. Half of the true martial university would collapse if the 2 of us were to join forces in order to wipe them out. Shou Kuan had ample killing intention, as he said. Many small groups of the true martial university had arrived here this time. There were many geniuses in those groups. However, the most outstanding experts were that member of the Heavenly Punishment faction, Bai Jingwei and Gao Lingxiu. Therefore, it wouldn't be wrong to say that half of the strength of the true martial university's team would collapse if Bai Jingwei and Gao Lingxiu got killed here. Brother Shou, let's start at once. I'll handle Gao Lingxiu. I give that ignorant Bai Jingwei to you. The rest of our disciples will handle the others. Li Yifeng said. I can exterminate them alone. Shou Kuan let out a cruel smile. However, he didn't oppose the proposal. The true martial university's people weren't weak. So, there was no certainty that he alone would be able to kill them before that member of the Heavenly Punishment faction arrived. And things would turn out bad for him if that happened. Even he was a bit afraid of that bunch of monsters, the legendary Heavenly Punishment faction. Bai Jingwei's complexion turned ugly. Have they already considered us dead? Have they already given their verdict? They'll take care of Gao Lingxiu. I've heard that she's hiding a big secret on her body. Even a foreign force like the Emergent School is coveting her. Li Yifeng laughed mischievously as he looked at Gao Lingxiu. His avaricious eyes made Gao Lingxiu frown. Yi Shiwen was thinking how to deal with these people. Suddenly, Bai Jingwei's voice reverberated in his mind. Brother Yi, I hadn't anticipated that they would find some hints about our plan. You should walk away when the fight starts. I know your speed is very fast. So, you would be able to escape. Also, take Sister Gao along with you. Let me handle this situation. I'll hold them up here. Brother Bai, you can't deal with these 2 individuals on your own. Yi Shiwen replied. Bai Jingwei's words couldn't deceive him. I may not be able to deal with them. However, I can hold them here. I can't defeat them. However, I'm sure that they can't kill me either. Bai Jingwei said. He seemed very confident. Relax, leave them to me. I won't let any of them leave this place. Not a single one of them will escape. Yi Shiwen coldly said. He stepped forward as he spoke up. The murderous intent had already risen in Yi Ziwen's heart. Shou Kuan and Li Yifeng looked at Yi Shiwen in disbelief. They didn't know from where this ignorant boy had come out. Even Bai Jingwei couldn't dare to say that he could kill both of them. So, who in the world was this boy to dare claiming this? This guy is insane. He has dared to say that he'll keep all of us here. Li Yifeng was stunned. He still thought that he had misheard him. This guy is extremely daring and unruly. He's indeed quite arrogant. Only such mad disciples are left in the true martial university now. So, how would it not decline? They themselves are responsible for this. Shokun sneered and said, "Bang!" That hill-sized huge tiger under Shokun's feet finally moved at this time. A giant tiger's claw suddenly swept down towards Yi Shiwen to grab him. It seemed as if it would tear this unruly guy into two halves. A ferocious beast's aura spread overwhelmingly. It seemed as if this claw would rip apart the entire world. This spirit beast also possessed the strength of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. In fact, it was far more powerful than an ordinary expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. Many people were quite afraid of the people of the 10,000 Beasts Villa. This was because they and their pet spirit beasts would grow up together from childhood. Therefore, fighting with one of them was equal to fighting two people at the same time. Shokun was already very hard to deal with. And he had a powerful spirit beast on top of that. Bai Jingwei had set up a trap to deal with only Shokun. However, he had still invited Gao Lingxiu and that member of the Heavenly Punishment faction. Moreover, he even wanted to lay out all kinds of matrix barriers in order to be absolutely safe. Yi Shiwen stood still. Endless divinities emitted from his entire body and illuminated the world in an instant. Half of the sky had been covered by his divinities. Then, Yi Ziwen's figure suddenly disappeared, and he got replaced by the Star Colossus avatar when he reappeared. A pair of murderous eyes filled with bloodthirst and killing intent curled up in a ruthless mood. And the endless void in the sky distorted under the bombardment of this gaze. Countless primary spirit dawns streamed out from the heavenly source mirror. They flew in midair and began to burn. They then transformed into spirit energies and frantically instilled into Yi Ziwen's body. Yi Ziwen's aura surged up as the endless spirit energies began to enter his body. It seemed as if a dead person had suddenly come back to life. His aura went against all the rules of the world as it violently surged up. It seemed as if he had directly made a breakthrough into the half-step Great Sage Realm from the Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen found that he had suddenly become even more ferocious and bloodthirsty after he had replaced his body with that of a Star Colossus. This had happened because of the militant factor. After all, the cruel addiction for slaughtering was present inside every cell of the Star Colossus body. A heaven-startling sword rainbow suddenly blazed out from his hand and soared into the sky. It then formed a huge sword column in the sky. The buried sword secret technique had begun to boil in his hand. Yi Ziwen's sword energy traveled in the sky like a rainbow and shattered that huge tiger's attack. That tiger's attack got smashed. Also, a huge black crack opened in the middle of the sky. The black crack then spread out in all directions in the sky, just like a spider's web. His current energy consumption was much smaller than the time when he had displayed the power of the Great Sage Realm. The present consumption was small. However, more than 100 million primary spirit dawn were still required for fighting just once. It must be mentioned that this would exhaust nearly the entire wealth of an expert of the half-step Great Sage Realm. In fact, this price was so huge that even a rich person like Yi Shiwen wouldn't agree to pay this price with ease. The primary spirit dawn would start to flow out like running water if he promoted the fighting prowess of the Star Colossus avatar to the Great Sage Realm. Roar! The huge tiger screamed. Its claw was drenched with blood. After all, nearly its entire claw had been cut off by Yi Shiwen. So, blood was splashing out like a fountain from it. Good boy. I've underestimated you. Shokun's vision turned even colder as he stood on that huge tiger. It seemed as if a beast god had reincarnated from ancient times. This beast god was emitting a valiant aura. His chaotic and barbaric aura was boiling. The phantom of a chaotic beast god immediately formed behind him. It then looked up to the sky and roared. Then, the dark club made up of wolf teeth suddenly pounded down upon Yi Ziwen's body. Boy, I don't know what method you're using to promote your strength. But what would you do about the disparity? Do you even understand what disparity is? I believe that you're just an ant, an overreaching ant. Shokun's ice-cold ruthless voice fell along with that dark club. That wolf-teethed club transformed into a huge wolf head when it was about to arrive in front of Yi Shiwen. It then suddenly opened its mouth wide, sucked in the energy in the atmosphere, and transformed them into a huge energy ball. This energy ball then smashed down. Bang! That huge energy ball suddenly smashed down upon Yi Zaiwen's body. A huge mushroom cloud rose up from the scene. It was very dreadful. An incomparably terrifying force was released, and this force then swept across in all directions. The terrifying power disintegrated the void, and the space of the devil world shattered into pieces like a mirror. Those experts looked at this scene in a daze. Shokuin is way too powerful. How can an expert of the half-step Great Sage realm launch such an attack? The complexions of the true Martial University's disciples suddenly turned deathly pale when they saw that Yi Zaiwen's entire body had been engulfed by the explosion. It didn't matter whether they liked Yi Shiwen or not. After all, he was fighting for them at this time. Therefore, it was impossible that they would disregard him. Bai Jingwei and Gao Lingxiu were just about to begin. However, Li Yifeng blocked them. He sneered and said while looking at both of them, "I'm your opponent. And he is screwed. Nobody can come out alive from that attack. All of you will die today." Ling Fei was the only one present who wasn't worried. After all, her martial power was unfathomably profound. An ordinary person couldn't see what had become of Yi Shiwen. However, she had clearly understood everything by having a mere glance at the situation. You're an ant without any reputation. So, you should feel privileged to die by my hands. Shokun's expression was ice-cold. It seemed as if he was just smashing an ant. He didn't care even a bit. The smoke and dust dissipated, and a figure appeared before everyone. Everyone was left in shock when they saw the scene before their eyes. Even the molecules of air should have been blown away by that attack. The space had gotten annihilated. So, how could a person have survived this? Is this all you've got? Chapter 6:15. Shokuin is too powerful. He deserves to be called a contemporary to Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie. He hasn't advanced to a higher realm in so many years. However, his martial power has become incredibly profound because of the accumulation of so many years. Perhaps, he'll become a powerhouse of the Great Sage realm if he were to make a breakthrough. He's a great core disciple of the 10,000 Beasts Villa. So, he has inherited many martial techniques that are impossible for many other disciples. This is hateful. These techniques should belong to our university. These damn traitors. Shokun's fighting prowess had left everyone in shock. They might have been exploded in just one move if they had come across such fighting prowess in Yi Zaiwen's place. Even Bai Jing Weiss and Gao Lingxiu's complexions had turned unsightly at this time. It wasn't that they hadn't anticipated Shokun's fighting prowess. They indeed had. In fact, that's why they had wanted to take numerous precautions. It was just that they hadn't gotten enough time to take these precautions since Shokuin had arrived out of nowhere. Meanwhile, the people of the 10,000 Beasts Villa and Xianyuan Palace Hall were looking excited. It was clear that Shokun's fighting prowess had boosted their morale enormously. Especially, the 10,000 Beasts Villa's people were even more encouraged. Some of them were participating in the Devil World competition for the first time. However, they believed that they would triumph in every battle as long as they followed Shokuin. "Is this all you've got?" A cold voice suddenly resounded. Then, a figure slowly appeared in front of everyone as the dust settled. Everyone opened their eyes wide. It was Yi Shiwen. He had survived. He hadn't died even after he had taken such a terrifying attack head-on. Such vitality was far greater than normal. Yi Zaiwen's expression was ice-cold. Shokun's recent attack had been very dreadful, so much so that an ordinary expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm would have exploded on the spot. Even Bai Jingwei and the others might have sustained injuries if they had come across such an attack. However, Yi Zaiwen's body was extremely formidable. Moreover, the body of the Star Colossus avatar was even tougher than that of its master. In fact, the toughness of its body must be far beyond Great Sage level. It was extremely dreadful. Shokuin suddenly narrowed his eyes. He hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would survive. He had been very confident about his martial arts technique. However, Yi Shiwen was still alive and kicking. This was a big insult for him. Shokuin was well aware of his humiliation, so he immediately became angry. The beastly aura of his entire body skyrocketed, and his figure suddenly became even more ethereal. He looked like a legendary beast god. His aura became more tyrannical with every step that he took. The inexhaustible devil energy in the surroundings was swept away by him, and he suddenly transformed into a demon god. The void in the vicinity transformed into a country of beasts in this moment. And he was the only god in this country. He didn't hesitate as he faced Yi Shiwen, whose figure was gradually emerging from the dust and smoke. A hand stretched out, and his palm transformed into a chicken claw. However, it wasn't an ordinary chicken claw. It was a silver-white claw of a real phoenix. In fact, it seemed as if the claw had been casted with silver. It emitted dark and cold rays of light amidst the glowing glaze of the devil energy. It seemed as if this claw would extinguish the world in a split second. It ripped apart a huge crack in the sky. This crack then swept out in all directions and left the entire world to shake. This claw then grasped toward Yi Zaiwen's head. It seemed as if it would smash it. Yi Shiwen had thoroughly angered him. This was clear from the fact that he hadn't held back in this attack. Humph! Yi Shiwen attacked. There was an austere killing intent in his eyes. He was determined to make the Star Colossus avatar go into action this time. He had even contemplated the idea of killing all of them. Otherwise, the price of 100 million primary spirit dawn would be too great a waste. Fire clouds falling sky hand. Yi Shiwen suddenly set out. A fiery big hand covered half of the sky and went up to make a counterattack. It swept out fire-colored energy pillars that rose to the sky. Both sides' attacks ferociously collided in the sky, and an incredibly dreadful force swept out the next moment. The energy waves unleashed by them collided in the sky. Tremendous energy waves, one red and one white, were grinding each other in the sky. The places that came in contact with these waves got swallowed by them. It was a very terrifying scene. Shokuin coldly snorted. The sound waves proliferated in all directions just like the sound of a big bell. He then marched forward, taking large strides. The silver waves once again began to boil. They seemed to possess even more power than before. Both sides had looked evenly matched at first. However, it suddenly seemed that Shokuin would overpower Yi Shiwen. Then, the dense silver waves smashed down. Yi Shiwen unceasingly swayed like a small boat in a tempest under the influence of this dreadful power. In fact, it seemed as if he would collapse any moment. Shokun's dreadful strength had been revealed. He wasn't a great sage. However, his accumulation was many years old. So, he could be considered as a peerless expert under the great sage realm. Bai Jingwei and the other people were also very powerful. However, Yi Shiwen could feel that the foundation of a 1,000-years-old fogi like Shokuin was much stronger than theirs. This was a one-of-a-kind accumulation. Any celestial genius could accelerate the accumulation. However, accelerated accumulation and long-term accumulation weren't the same thing. In fact, even the celestial geniuses required to accumulate. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a match even for an ordinary person. And Shokuin was someone whose accumulation had become profound to a scary extent. Moreover, he was a Heaven's Pride expert as well. So, he had both talent and accumulation. An ordinary expert couldn't even come close. He could almost be weighed as the strongest in the half-step great sage realm. Therefore, he had never paid attention to anyone, and had been unscrupulous his entire life. He could effortlessly slaughter a few senior Heaven's Pride experts. And the true martial university was his current target. That's why Bai Jingwei had no choice but to launch an attack on him in advance. In fact, this was the main reason why Bai Jingwei had wanted to attack him. Yi Zaiwen's flaming red rays of light spread wide. It seemed as if a dreadful power was boiling within. A barbarian god had condensed behind him. It seemed as if the surrounding area had transformed into a world of barbarians. The beasts suddenly performed a long-range raid from the world of beasts unleashed by Shokuin and burst into the barbarian world. Countless barbarian experts were holding all kinds of weapons in the barbarian world. They began to kill the crowd of beasts that had arrived in their world. This was a competition between the embodiments of two martial concepts. Shao Kun's profound essence of the 10,000 Beasts Villa's heritage had given birth to the phantom of a beast god. However, Yi Shiwen was more ferocious than him. Yi Ziwen's martial way had reached beyond an ordinary person's comprehension. Especially, the fire cloud's falling sky hand had been deduced to the peak by him within a short time after it had fallen into his hands. Even the fire cloud cave's lord wouldn't have such a strong understanding of this technique. Bang! Both worlds were crushing and engulfing each other. A scene of doomsday had evolved in the sky. It seemed like the end of the world, like the dusk of gods. Two gods suddenly collided in the sky, each of them commanded a country. The edges of both worlds collapsed in the collision. Countless beasts and barbarian experts bellowed and clashed. Bloody battles were going on everywhere. The spectators were left dumbstruck. Is this a battle of gods? The fight between the two men appeared to be a reenactment of the fight between the gods. Both sides were using incredible methods that had been passed by the two ancient gods. It seemed that the contest between both methods was taking place via the hands of these two individuals after a period of countless years. The winner and loser among the two gods would be decided in this manner. How can he be so powerful? Li Yifeng looked at the two men involved in this intense fight. The expression on his face had turned frantic. He had agreed to arrive here and team up with Shao Kun in order to deal with Bai Jingwei and Gao Lingxiu. But wasn't it because of Shao Kun's incredible strength? Shao Kun had obtained the 6th rank on the merit list. He hadn't broken into the top 3. However, Li Yifeng knew that Shao Kun had the strength to be ranked in the top 3. It was just that the most crucial time hadn't arrived yet. And nobody wanted to reveal their entire strength before that time. The experts who occupied the top 20 positions on the merit list would begin to frantically slaughter the devil experts at the last moment. And they would crazily earn points at that time. So, that would be the time to see the results. Shao Kun had the strength to aspire for the top position. In fact, he had also shown interest in this. However, Li Yifeng had never anticipated that a random person of the true martial university would appear out of nowhere and stop Shao Kun. The situation had changed after their biggest support had been blocked. So, Li Yifeng must face Bai Jingwei and Gao Lingxiu alone now. And it was an entirely disadvantageous situation for him. He would have had an advantage if he were fighting just Gao Lingxiu. However, he would fall into a disadvantageous position while facing Bai Jingwei. After all, Bai Jingwei was much more powerful than Gao Lingxiu. However, he had to face both of these individuals at the same time now. Other people also felt the same. How can he be so ferocious? They felt as if a god had descended to the world as they witnessed Yi Ziwen's intrepid strength. However, they didn't know that Yi Shiwen had kept his real strength suppressed. In fact, he could have been countless times more powerful than present. Meanwhile, Ling Fei was excitedly watching the fight between the teams of Shao Kun and Yi Shiwen. Her beautiful eyes shone brightly. It seemed as if she had never seen a fight between people before. She was brandishing her small fist in excitement. In fact, she even wanted to replace Yi Shiwen and go fight herself. She would have gone up and taught a lesson to Shao Kun if Yi Shiwen hadn't prohibited her from revealing her strength. She would have told everyone that she believed that Shao Kun was extremely ugly and deserved to be taught a lesson. Yi Ziwen's voice sounded amidst the battle. "Brother, leave this to me. You don't need to worry." Yi Ziwen's words had made everyone feel that he was incomparably arrogant and boastful when he had spoken out before the battle had started. However, his current words had made them feel incomparably relaxed. And this was because they had seen that he truly had enough tyrannical strength to back up his words. "Everyone attack. Kill these traitors. Let them know how serious a crime it is to betray our university." Bai Jingwei roared. Several disciples of the true martial university became excited. Some of the people in the opposite party used to be their juniors, while some used to their comrades. However, all of them were now traitors in their opinion. Moreover, Shao Kun had been blocked. Therefore, The opposite party was very easy to handle now. The morale of the true Martial University's disciples had been boosted. However, the complexions of the disciples of the 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xianyuan Palace Hall had also undergone a big change. Chapter 616. Entirely one-sided, die. Several experts of the true Martial University had waged war on the disciples of the 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xianyuan Palace Hall under Bai Jingwei's leadership. Gao Ling Xiu shouted. She then attacked with her long sword. It transformed into a sword light and covered half of the sky. Bang! Ding! Various kinds of sounds were heard. And many experts of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa got annihilated in the sky. Gao Ling Xiu had finally begun to reveal the dreadful fighting prowess of a sage accomplished level expert who had broken into the top 20 ranks on the merit list. Those experts who had previously looked ferocious collapsed at the first blow of her sword. They simply didn't have the power to fight back. Li Yifeng opened his round eyes wide. It seemed as if his eyes had almost split open, as if blood was dripping from them. After all, the disciples who were dying were the Xianyuan Palace Hall's elites. Not all of them were elites. However, at least half of their force would collapse if these people got annihilated. In fact, the Xianyuan Palace Hall would lose almost an entire generation if they lost all of these people. Such a thing had never happened in the very long history of the Xianyuan Palace Hall. The core disciples weren't the real force of Xianyuan Palace Hall. However, they would undoubtedly lose an entire generation if all of them got killed. Its impact might not become visible within a short time. However, it would become visible after several hundred or thousand years. Li Yifeng suddenly had an intense feeling as if something had smashed down from the front. He promptly moved back 100 meters in order to avoid this stunning blade energy. Bang! The blade energy smashed down on the bottom of the mountain like a dragon and opened a huge gap. The ground trembled. It seemed to be wailing under this attack. Bai Jingwei. Li Yifeng instantly recognized this blade energy's owner. Sure enough, there was an ice-cold smiling expression on Bai Jingwei's face. His heart swelled with pride as he looked at Li Yifeng. They had been behaving arrogantly a moment ago. After all, there had been a possibility that the true Martial University's team would get wiped out. However, the situation had reversed now. And it was their turn to crush them. Li Feng, your opponent. Not a single person of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa should think of walking away from here today. I won't let any of you leave this place. Bai Jingwei stepped forward whilst carrying the long blade after he said this. He instantly arrived in front of Li Yifeng to kill him. He had revealed the dreadful strength of a person who was ranked 9th on the merit list. It must be said that his reputation wasn't underserved in any manner. He was incomparably dreadful. It seemed as if the sun and moon had lost their light and the world had lost its color under this blade. He had used his entire strength. He was ranked above Li Yifeng. However, there wasn't much disparity between them. The disparity wasn't to an extent that one of them would be crushed by another. The opposite party would be able to make a comeback if one of them didn't take care. But Bai Jingwei had plentiful battle experience. So, how could he make such a mistake? Therefore, he had used his entire strength at once. Bai Jingwei's strength was above that of Li Yifeng. So, Li Yifeng would obviously respond with his entire strength whilst facing such a full-strength attack. Otherwise, he might be killed by Bai Jingwei if he wasn't careful. However, he couldn't attend to other people. So, the experts of 10,000 Beasts Villa and Xianyuan Palace Hall had quickly retreated in defeat since they didn't have the support of a powerhouse. Meanwhile, the morale of the true Martial University's experts had gotten boosted enormously. So, they moved forward whilst slaughtering the entire way with Gao Ling Xiu spearheading the attack. Those experts of the 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xianyuan Palace Hall had looked arrogant and despotic a while ago. But they were quickly getting transformed into corpses now. This feeling of satisfaction had made the true Martial University's disciples very excited. They had gotten bullied by the opposite party earlier, but they were bullying them back now. This feeling was obviously a stark contrast with the previous one. "Stop, you bastards!" Blood almost dripped from Li Yifeng's eyes. These experts of Xianyuan Palace Hall were elites. Each of them had been nurtured with difficulty. People would regret the loss of even one of them. However, a large number of such experts had died. So, the vitality of his force had sustained a serious blow. However, how could Gao Ling Xiu stop her slaughtering because of Li Yifeng's words? They couldn't spare these people. Otherwise, it would be an irresponsible move on the part of the true martial university's disciples. Bang! A thunderous noise came through from another battlefield. It was the battlefield of Yi Shiwen and Shou Kun. The competition of martial concepts between these two individuals made it seem as if two gods who commanded their own country had collided violently. In fact, they had seemingly broken into each other's domain. The winner and loser had finally been decided. Everyone could see that Shou Kun's country of beasts had quickly collapsed. And Yi Ziwen's country of barbarians had become even more powerful. Everyone was almost scared to death when they saw this scene. Yi Shiwen was only a nonentity of the Sage Great Perfection realm, while Shou Kun was a top-tier expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm. Moreover, Shou Kun was ranked among the top 10 experts on the merit list. The disparity between the two sides was huge. However, Shou Kun had been defeated with ease in this contest of understanding of martial arts. It was tantamount to saying that Shou Kun's comprehension of martial arts was far inferior to that of Yi Shiwen. Moreover, everyone knew that Fire Cloud's Falling Sky Hand was a technique of southern barbarians, not of the true martial university. In other words, it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to obtain the traditional technique of Fire Cloud's Falling Sky Hand. Therefore, it was clear that Yi Shiwen had defeated Shou Kun depending upon his self-study of this technique. This revelation had caused far greater impact on them than any other thing. A Sage Great Perfection level expert had routed an expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm depending upon his understanding of martial arts. However, they didn't know that Yi Shiwen had a mysterious space for deducing techniques. His cultivation was far inferior to that of Shou Kun. However, this didn't mean that his understanding of martial arts would also be inferior. The technique of Fire Cloud's Falling Sky Hand was an example of this. Even many great sage experts of the Fire Cloud Cave wouldn't dare to say that they had a better understanding of this technique than Yi Shiwen did. Yi Shiwen commanded his country of barbarians just like a true deity, and smashed it down upon Shou Kun. Consequently, the dreadful pressure pressed down with an irresistible force. Shou Kun's feet had sunk into the head of the huge tiger he was standing on. That hill-sized fierce tiger was also roaring in pain at this time. It was also feeling the dreadful coercion that had smashed down from the sky. Yi Ziwen's body had been replaced by the Star Colossus. It must be mentioned that the Star Colossus was an ominous beast that used to swallow planets for food. It was on top of the food chain of all demon beasts, devil beasts, and ominous beasts. It had restrained its aura. However, it had set out its instinctive coercion without any hesitation. Shou Kun's complexion had turned ashen. He was just watching Yi Shiwen pressing down upon him from the sky. How can he be so powerful? The real elemental energy of Shou Kun's entire body surged up in order to resist this dreadful force. Humph! Grovel before me! Yi Shiwen descended from the sky. A fist transformed into a huge star, and suppressed all directions. It was just like a collision of stars. Big Bang Stardust Fist. Almost the entire surroundings transformed into a void. It was the result of insane comprehension. The experts of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa roared at this time. However, they didn't have any method to back Shou Kun up. In fact, they couldn't even reach close to Shou Kun. It had become difficult for them to protect themselves. So, there was no chance that they could rush to help Shou Kun. Everyone held their breath as they saw this scene unfold before their eyes. They were shocked in their hearts. It was like they were in a perilous situation. Shou Kun had great strength and illustrious reputation. It looked self-evident. There was no one here who could defeat him one-on-one. There were very few people even in big martial arts competitions who would dare to say that they could defeat Shou Kun one-on-one. It could be done only after using countless moves. Moreover, nobody could defeat Shou Kun in the crushing manner. However, Yi Shiwen had still pulled it off. Bang! The Big Bang Stardust fist smashed down. Poochie! Shou Kun smashed his hands out. He felt a dreadful force being poured into his body as soon as he took the attack. He couldn't help but feel the taste of blood in his throat. He spouted a mouthful of blood essence, and his entire body went out flying upside down, like a kite with a broken string. Yi Shiwen was about to chase him down. However, he saw that huge tiger moving at this time. Its body was hill-sized. However, its speed was still very fast. It was extremely agile. Its speed and body didn't seem to be in harmony. It left a trail of afterimages in the sky as it pounced on Yi Shiwen. Its speed was incomparably fast for ordinary people. However, it still wasn't good enough in front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen stepped out. He wasn't the one to rush out first, but he had still arrived first. He had taken the lead to rush out and kill the enemy instead of letting the enemy do that to him. He arrived right in front of that fierce tiger. Then he spread both of his hands. They transformed into two big energy hands and rose against the wind. The big hands swept towards the wings of the tiger and grabbed them. Tear! The loud and clear sound of something tearing sounded. The pair of that fierce tiger's huge wings had been torn by Yi Shiwen. Blood splashed out and steamed down everywhere. Roar! The fierce tiger screamed. It had had these magical wings since its birth. However, those wings had now been torn apart by Yi Shiwen. The blood splashed everywhere, and the bone fragments swirled in the air. It was in an unbearable pain. Get out of my way! Yi Shiwen kicked it. His kick formed an afterimage of a whip in the sky and tore through the air. Bang! The hill-sized body of that fierce tiger got blown away by Yi Shiwen's one kick. My little pet! Shou Kun saw the wings of his partner being torn apart. This beast had been with him since childhood. However, it had been blown away by a kick. Moreover, it wasn't clear whether it was alive or dead. His eyes remained wide open in shock. There was a desire of tearing the opposite party into pieces in his eyes. He clenched his teeth so tightly that they almost shattered. He then said with his blood-stained mouth, "You'll pay the price for your actions." Shou Kun roared. He was roaring like a wounded beast. The expression in his eyes became even more deadly. It awed everyone. He was the Beastmaster even though he was wounded. So, how could an ordinary person be compared with him? Pay the price? Well said. It applies for old matters too. You've killed several disciples of our true martial university. So, it's the time for you to pay the price for your actions now. Yi Shiwen let out a sneer through the corner of his mouth. When it comes to retribution and whatnot, one must know that as many as 100 disciples of the true martial university had died at Shou Kun's hands. Moreover, those experts had been elites. So, they must be avenged. How can the trivial lives of those ants be on a par with me? The expression in Shou Kun's eyes became crazed. His eyes had become bloodshot. He looked like a crazed beast. I'll make you regret. I won't let you live. I won't let you die. I'll torture you every day and night. You'll die a pathetic death. Shou Kun's aura was still soaring unceasingly. It suddenly broke through the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm and entered the Great Sage Realm. Chapter 617. All counterattacks go in vain. Shou Kun had been hovering around the half-step Great Sage Realm for 1,000 years. Such accumulation had taken him to the front of the Great Sage Realm's threshold. In fact, he had only differed from the Great Sage Realm by an inch. Therefore, he could make the breakthrough as long as he would undergo a normal closed-door training. However, this was impossible for Bai Jingwei and the other people even though they were on the same level as him. So, one could well imagine how dreadful Shou Kun was. However, Shou Kun hadn't had any extra time for making a normal breakthrough at this time. He could only make the breakthrough forcibly. This breakthrough hadn't occurred because of comprehending something during the fight. Instead, it was the result of profound accumulation. Making a breakthrough forcibly in this way would certainly cause some injuries that would be hard to repair. In fact, it would cause immeasurable injuries in the future. However, how could Shokun care too much about this thing at this time? You ain't like man. You've thoroughly infuriated me. You'll die today. But you won't die alone. Soon, everyone in your true martial university will die. Our 10,000 Beasts Villa will sweep away the entire world. And it'll be the only god. Ha ha ha. Shokun's power was still rising. He had reached the peak of the initial stage of the Great Sage realm within a short time. His dreadful accumulation had finally revealed a terrifying might. Shokun suddenly launched an attack on Yi Shiwen. His speed had increased to the peak. He was clearly displaying the dreadful strength of the Great Sage realm. Bang! Yi Shiwen was struck by a fist, and his body went out flying like a kite without string. Ha! You damned ant! I won't let you live. I won't let you die. They'll take out your soul, and you'll suffer endless torture year after year. Shokun had gone insane. He looked just like a crazed beast. He has made a breakthrough. The hearts of true martial universities people sank as they saw Shokun's new form. It would have been very difficult to deal with Shokun even if he were still in the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm. However, everyone would have had some confidence in that case. After all, there would have been quantitative disparity between them. But there wouldn't have been any qualitative disparity. However, the qualitative disparity had suddenly come into play after Shokun had made the breakthrough into Great Sage realm. They had placed high hopes on Yi Shiwen. However, even he had been blown away in one blow. Such fighting prowess was enough to make them terrified. Bai Jing Wei's complexion had changed significantly. In particular, he was fighting Li Yifeng at present. After all, he hadn't expected that Shokun would make a breakthrough in this most crucial time. Ha! You'll meet your death today. True martial university, will soon be history. It will be reduced to a mere name. Li Yifeng laughed furiously. His spirits had lifted, as if he had suddenly risen to heaven from hell. This development had made him much more excited than a person on a roller coaster ride. Is this all you've got? You're such a disappointment. A clear and cold voice came from afar. Then a boundless imposing aura soared to the sky and smashed the endless clouds. Another great sage. Everyone was stunned. They had witnessed the appearance of two great sages in succession. The faces of the true martial university's people exposed a look of excitement. And that was because this voice belonged to none other than Yi Shiwen, the same Yi Shiwen who had been blown away in one punch a moment ago. Yi Ziwen's endless divinities surged about. They engulfed him and transformed into a golden storm. A human figure was faintly visible standing inside this storm. Suddenly, everyone had an illusion. They felt as if this figure wasn't that of a human. It seemed that it was an exceptional ominous beast carrying a murderous aura. The bloody energy swept all across. Moreover, it seemed like a dreadful ominous beast of the Great Sage realm. Ant? The inexhaustible spirit energies were boiling inside Yi Ziwen's body. They then combusted and integrated into his body. Shokun had unexpectedly made the breakthrough into the Great Sage realm. This had forced Yi Shiwen to let go of the restriction and make the Star Colossus avatar quickly break through into the Great Sage realm. 100 million primary spirit dawn had been burnt in order to put away the restriction. This price was unimaginable. Yi Shiwen looked at Shokun with eyes full of killing intention. Die, you fucking ant. Yi Shiwen rushed out. His body suddenly transformed into a golden light along with a loud bang inside the void. However, it was obviously just an afterimage. His real body had already smashed its way through the void and appeared in front of Shokun. It must be said that the body of his Star Colossus avatar was peerless. It could travel back and forth within the space. On top of that, Yi Shiwen had the stunning magical agility technique of the devil wings. And he had revealed his dreadful fighting prowess in its entirety at this moment. He raised his fist, and endless spirit energies instantly gathered on top of it. His fist then transformed into a big star and smashed down upon Shokun. Bang! 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 Yi Zaiwen's fist pressure unceasingly pressed down. It seemed as if it would extinguish the world. All the defenses on Shou Kun's body got destroyed layer by layer. His sage-level armor also couldn't resist. It broke down into pieces, and the fragments began to swirl about in the air. Bang! It took a lot of time to describe. However, everything had happened at light speed. Then Yi Zaiwen's fist struck Shou Kun's chest. Its speed was incomparably fast. Shou Kun didn't get the opportunity to react, and was hit by that fist. Bang! Shou Kun crashed onto the ground at the speed of a bullet. A several hundred feet wide and dozen feet deep crater was formed on the ground as a result. Shou Kun couldn't help but spout a mouthful of blood. The scene turned silent after this. In fact, there was a pin-drop silence. Everyone was left dumbstruck after they saw this scene before their eyes. How could the outcome be like this? They couldn't have imagined that the outcome could be like this. Shou Kun had gained the upper hand at first. He should have gone on a killing spree after making the breakthrough. However, the situation was reversed soon after that. Everyone felt as if they were having a roller coaster ride. It would rise to heaven one moment, and would fall down to hell the next. People with weak hearts might have been scared to death. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen in a manner that made it seem as if they were looking at a monster. After all, even great sage Shou Kun had been wrecked by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen seemed to have no limit. Yi Shiwen could always overpower Shou Kun no matter how much Shou Kun promoted his strength. This Yi Shiwen is too powerful. He is fully equipped with crushing strength. Ah! Shou Kun's roar came from inside the pit, and echoed in all directions. It shook the entire world. He had never suffered such a big humiliation. He hadn't even displayed his absolute strength when he had been overpowered by Yi Shiwen once again. Someone had crushed Shou Kun in front of everyone without using any tricks. This person had done so depending solely upon tyrannical strength. It was very difficult for Shou Kun to accept this. He had the biggest qualifications among these core disciples. He had already become famous like his peers Huang Wuji et al. However, he had been crushed by a trivial junior. This was a tight slap on his face. There was no way Yi Shiwen was going to give the opposite party a chance to respite. He stepped across a very long distance and attacked. Spirit energies present in the surroundings condensed into a big star and smashed down. The 10,000 Beasts Villa's people thought to rescue Shou Kun. However, they couldn't catch up with Yi Zaiwen's speed. After all, this was a fight of the great sage level. So, they didn't have any means to interfere in it. Suddenly, stunning rays of light emitted from inside the deep pit. Then, a crescent moon-shaped blade beam swept out. It rose whilst facing the wind, and became 10,000 feet long in an instant. It ripped apart the void, and swept down towards Yi Shiwen. Brother Yi, be careful. It's a great sage tool. Bai Jingwei instantly recognized this blade energy that carried terrifying power. However, he didn't need to remind Yi Shiwen since Yi Shiwen had also recognized it. It was an incomplete great sage tool. The number of great sage tools was very less as compared to the number of great sages. Many great sages still used sage tools since they didn't have enough resources to refine a great sage tool for themselves. Countless people would go crazy if they came across just an incomplete great sage tool. Shou Kun had only been in the half-step great sage realm until very recently. However, he still possessed an incomplete great sage tool. This fact was enough to prove how important he was for the 10,000 Beasts Villa. Yi Shiwen had fought with Chao Yuyu. That man had possessed an incomplete great sage tool. So, he had a lingering fear of the great sage tool's might. Both of his opponents possessed a great sage tool. However, the might displayed by Chao Yuyu's great sage tool was entirely different from the might revealed by Shou Kun's great sage tool. After all, the latter was a great sage initial stage expert. It must be mentioned that a great sage tool was equal to a great sage level divine tool. And only great sages could display its true might. Therefore, this great sage long blade displayed incredible might in Shou Kun's hands. It was incomplete. However, it still possessed infinite might. I don't know how you have made the breakthrough. However, everything will end now. A crazed look flashed on Shokun's face. He didn't look calm and composed at this time. He was just thinking about killing this vile ant. After all, he wanted everyone to know the end of an ant who had dared to challenge a great dragon. However, Yi Shiwen was unfazed by this. A big hand stretched out. Then, it soared to the sky and rushed towards that incredible blade energy in order to grab it. In fact, a look of disdain had flashed on Yi Zaiwen's face. He wouldn't have dared to grab that great sage tool like this if this were his real body. After all, he would have received a huge wound on his hand. However, the situation was different now. After all, this was the Star Colossus avatar. It couldn't display its entire strength since there was a need of endless primary spirit dawn to make it work. However, the toughness of its body had always been there. And it was enough to grab a great sage tool with bare hands. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's big hand and that stunning blade energy collided with each other. However, it didn't lead to the stunning explosion that everyone had anticipated. This was because Yi Zaiwen's incredible big hand had grabbed that blade's tip. So, only a muffled noise had sounded instead. Moreover, this sound was produced when he had grabbed and extinguished the blade energy. Is this what you had been relying upon? Die for me if it is so. Yi Shiwen grinned and exposed a mouthful of pure white teeth. His expression had become ice cold. Then, his figure ferociously moved and appeared inside the deep crater. Chapter 6:18 Slaughters everyone. Yi Shiwen had appeared very suddenly. However, Shokuin didn't remain idle either. He brandished his long blade, and it immediately produced blade beams. The space made a loud buzzing sound and trembled. This was a Dao sound. Every movement of a divine tool contains the presence of Dao principles once it arrives at Great Sage level, just like the experts of Great Sage level. Therefore, that vibration and the buzzing sound contain the traces of Dao. In fact, the experts of Hotian and Xiantian realms would have obtained big profits if they had seen it. Shokuin had tyrannical cultivation. He contained Dao on his person to such an extent that he might become the embodiment of Dao and transform his very body into Dao. Such dreadful halos displayed incredible might under the control of an unimaginable blade technique. This was Shokun's blade technique which he had obtained himself. It was the technique of some ancient sect. And this blade technique had fallen into his hands after the decline of that sect. He had killed many enemies on several occasions depending solely upon this blade technique. However, this set of blade techniques was simply nothing in front of Yi Shiwen. It got instantly eradicated by him. Stars chopping blade! Shokuin shouted. Then, his entire real elemental energy condensed and swept out through the hilt of the blade. It carried an abundance of killing intention for Yi Shiwen. This great sage tool completely withstood Shokun's fighting prowess. An ordinary sage tool would have exploded if Shokuin had gone all out and poured out all his power. Therefore, even great sages couldn't display their entire power if they had mere sage tool in their hands. Only great sage tools could truly reveal the power of a great sage. Shokuin possessed a great sage tool at present. So, his fighting prowess had gone up to 120%. However, Yi Shiwen was unfazed by this. He clenched his fist. The surroundings transformed into a boundless starry sky and clashed down with the incoming blade attack. Bang! The dreadful collision set off a boundless storm. A feeble cracking sound was heard. It wasn't remarkable in the sound of the violent explosion. However, everyone had still heard it quite clearly. Everyone was left dumbstruck when they saw that the great sage long blade had cracked under the explosion. This is a great sage tool, and someone has grabbed it with bare hands. Moreover, this long blade has been shattered. What is his body made up of that he is so powerful? Especially, those people of the true martial university were left dumbstruck. They had also inquired about Yi Shiwen. So, they knew that Yi Shiwen ought to have cultivated a very powerful body technique. However, they hadn't anticipated that he would shatter that great sage-level long blade with bare hands. This was the result of cultivating a top-tier body technique. Shokuin just felt a very large power reverberating. He felt as if a stunning giant power had poured into his hand whilst traveling through the long blade like a powerful spiral. In fact, the web between his thumb and forefinger had been ruptured by the vigorous impact. He had almost dropped his blade. He simply couldn't hold it anymore. One must know that this great sage long blade wasn't just tough. It could also dissolve the majority of power of an attack. However, his palm had still been ruptured. So, one could well imagine how massive this power must have been. He almost spouted blood fiercely. As the situation stood now, he didn't have an extremely high or lofty enthusiasm like earlier. He had lived for 1,000 years. So, it was obvious that not every opponent that he had encountered had been weaker than him. However, he was still alive and kicking while all of his opponents were dead. Moreover, he had now become a very famous person too. What had kept him alive all this time? It was naturally his wariness. He didn't forge ahead blindly. And he knew when he must retreat. However, he had big grievances in his heart now. He had never been bullied by a junior like this. Moreover, he had never suffered such a big defeat either. However, he didn't have any choice but to retreat now. After all, he could still look for an opportunity to attack and kill Yi Shiwen in the future if he retreated right now. He would have a fair chance to attack and kill Yi Shiwen as long as he escaped. His accumulation was very profound. Therefore, his cultivation would once again rise sharply within a short time as long as he got enough time. Great Sage Initial Stage wasn't a match for Yi Shiwen. But what about Great Sage Intermediate Stage or Great Sage Late Stage? It would be Yi Zaiwen's time of death when Shou Kun's cultivation would rise again. Shou Kun could eventually attack and kill Yi Shiwen if he escaped now. What would Yi Shiwen do at that time even if he possessed formidable strength? Moreover, Shou Kun understood that Yi Zaiwen's great strength obviously wasn't his own. It seemed that Yi Shiwen had paid a high price for making a breakthrough into the Great Sage realm. Moreover, he didn't believe that Yi Shiwen could produce Great Sage-level fighting prowess whenever he wanted. It would be impossible for Yi Shiwen to reveal such strength next time. Therefore, I'll be his time of death when I fight him again. Shou Kun's entire real elemental energy exploded. His figure was about to fly out of the crater. He had realized that he would be able to kill Yi Shiwen the next time as long as he retreated now. However, couldn't Yi Shiwen have realized this as well? Yi Shiwen sneered. He knew that he would be in big trouble if he allowed Shou Kun to get away. Yi Shiwen believed that killing Li Yifeng would be as simple as trampling an ant if he let him escape this time, and fought with him later instead. However, Shou Kun was different. His almost 1,000 years of accumulation had made his martial power profound to a dreadful extent. He had deliberately suppressed his martial power in the past since he didn't wish to make a breakthrough into the Great Sage realm. Otherwise, he could make successive breakthroughs within a short time as long as he was willing. And Yi Shiwen wouldn't be able to suppress him if that happened. In fact, he might have to make Ling Fei go into action in that case. And Yi Shiwen didn't want that to happen. You want to escape? I won't let you leave this place today. Yi Shiwen sneered. Countless starlights erupted from his palm. They then weaved a huge net of starlight and swept toward Shou Kun to shroud him. It was the 1,000 Stars Tyrant Palm. Yi Zaiwen's grasp of the 1,000 Stars Tyrant Palm wasn't a bit inferior to his understanding of the fire cloud's falling sky hand. It could be said that any martial technique wasn't an issue for him as long as he had enough spirit energies. Shou Kun struggled to break free. He wanted to escape from that huge star net. However, Yi Zaiwen's movement was very fast. He obviously wasn't going to let him do so. Consequently, Shou Kun immediately got shrouded by that net. This day will be your death anniversary next year. Yi Zaiwen's martial power erupted in its entirety. And that huge star net started getting tighter and tighter as a result. Consequently, Shou Kun got completely shrouded by it soon after. Bang! 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 That huge star net became tighter. Violent explosions occurred unceasingly on Shou Kun's body whenever the starlights of that huge star net touched it. Blood splashed out, and he screamed unceasingly. However, it was useless to struggle. After all, he couldn't set himself free from that net no matter how much he tried. Damn it! How is this possible? Li Yifeng had been defeated by Bai Jingwei by now. He was a legendary expert. However, Bai Jingwei had accumulated immense anger and had vented that anger at this time. Li Yifeng's strength was slightly weaker than that of Bai Jingwei. However, the disparity seemed greater at this time. Li Yifeng became scared to death when he saw Shou Kun screaming endlessly. The great sage Shou Kun, whom he considered as his biggest support, was now screaming and struggling like a trapped beast. Therefore, Li Yifeng had become scared to death when he had seen this scene. The 10,000 Beasts Villa withdraws from the competition this time. Yi Shiwen coldly said. Then, a palm suddenly smashed down. Shou Kun, who had been screaming endlessly, was struck by this palm and transformed into blood fog. He hadn't had any power to protect himself. This blood fog had covered the entire sky. However, it soon got absorbed by Yemo. That great sage Longblade also got absorbed along with the blood fog. Haha, Yi Shiwen, it's great. Absorbing the blood essence of this great sage has led to a new beginning. I'm about to make a breakthrough and become a great sage tool myself. Yi Mo shouted in excitement. He had been waiting for this day since a very long time. However, this situation would be completely different if he could get the support of an intact great sage tool. Yi Shiwen had already caught a great sage tool twice with bare hands. His body was tough enough. However, he had been in a difficult situation the last time he had dealt with a great sage tool. So, it would save him a lot of trouble if he also had a great sage tool. After all, blood had splashed out from his hand when he had grabbed the demon-inscribed tablet. However, he hadn't had any other way at that time. So, he had been forced to withstand it with clenched teeth back then. Yi Mo submerged into the depths of the heavenly source mirror as soon as he was done talking. He then began the closed-door training to make a breakthrough and become a great sage tool. Only Yi Mo was like this among all the divine tools that Yi Shiwen had seen so far. He had never heard of any other divine tool evolving through such a method. Let's go quickly. This man is extremely ferocious. We must escape quickly. Otherwise, I'm afraid that all of us will die here. Some people's courage suddenly crumbled when they saw that Shou Kun had died in Yi Ziwen's hands. So, they quickly turned around to escape. Let's escape quickly. Wait until we gather even more tyrannical experts. Then we'll come back and kill this monster. Run quickly. The disciples of the 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xianyuan Palace Hall finally panicked. Each of them was powerful enough to take charge of a region. The situations in which they would be perturbed had been quite rare up until now. However, they couldn't keep calm when they saw that Shou Kun had been killed on the spot. They were extremely close to death at this time. In fact, they might die at any time. True Martial University, you are a sworn enemy of our Xianyuan Palace as well as the 10,000 Beasts Villa from now on. These disciples of the 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xianyuan Palace Hall wanted to escape. However, how could Bai Jingwei and the others allow them to do so? Bai Jingwei and the others simply didn't care about these empty threats. Li Yifeng shouted and let out a sonic boom. The entire horizon trembled under the terrifying fluctuations. He set himself free from Bai Jingwei's grip in one fell swoop, turned around, and began to escape. However, a big hand suddenly appeared in the sky. It then smashed down towards him and grabbed him. Bang! Li Yifeng didn't have the power to defend himself. So, he got crushed on the spot. Shou Kun and Li Yifeng had been killed by Yi Shiwen. The rest of the people wanted to escape. However, they couldn't escape from the encirclement of Yi Shiwen and the others. Soon, all of them got slaughtered one by one. Everyone. Yi Shiwen descended from the sky. He had quietly switched the body of the Star Colossus avatar with his real body and returned to the Sage Great Perfection realm. These people have been executed. So, I would like to bid farewell. He had burnt more than 400 million primary spirit dawn in killing Shou Kun. However, he had also obtained many benefits. After all, Yi Mo would soon make a breakthrough and become a great sage tool. Basically, it wasn't a deal of loss as far as he was concerned. Chapter 619. One stone stirs up 1,000 waves, he must hide now. He must try to find a place where he could digest this time's gains. Moreover, this time's matter had been a wake-up call for him. He had realized that there was still a huge disparity between him and the top-tier experts. He obviously couldn't deal with those great sages. However, he didn't even have a way to deal with the experts of the late stage of half-step great sage realm. After all, he couldn't summon the Star Colossus avatar every time. He needed 100 million primary spirit dawn just to promote his fighting prowess to the late stage of half-step great sage realm. So, he could forget about promoting it to the great sage realm. Yi Shiwen possessed far more wealth than an ordinary great sage. However, he couldn't spend it so crazily. Therefore, it would be better to promote his own strength instead of relying upon the Star Colossus avatar to replace him every time. How much wealth would he be able to save in that case? Becoming top tier meant that he would need to reach the most peak condition of the sage realm. Thereafter, he could touch the edge of the great sage realm. Brother Yi, please do as you please. Bai Jingwei cupped his hands in obeisance and said. He didn't dare to stop Yi Shiwen from leaving. He had also seen that Yi Shiwen had suddenly revealed the fighting prowess of the great sage realm. However, it had happened because of a different method. So, he couldn't interpret it clearly. The disparity between the great sage realm and the sage realm was as massive as the separation between heaven and earth. It was impossible for sage-level experts to cross this gap even if they believed they could. Therefore, it was unlikely that they would look down upon Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen and Ling Fei stepped across the space and quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. Yi Shiwen, that was too exciting. Yi Shiwen wasn't feeling anything. However, Ling Fei was quite excited. She was hopping beside him in excitement. It seemed that she had never encountered such an exciting matter in her entire life. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but laugh. Ling Fei looks like an innocent young girl. She can feel happy for a long time just by watching a fight between two groups of ants. Ling Fei's martial arts accomplishments had already become profound to an unfathomable extent. However, she hadn't matured. Fortunately, she belonged to the fallen angel race, and this race had been blessed by the heavens. Otherwise, it would be enough to make countless heroes spout a mouthful of blood if a person with such mind cultivated to this extent in the human race. Those experts would get depressed to death. All the people of the true martial university let out a sigh of relief when they saw that both of the individuals had gone far away. They had initially suspected that Yi Shiwen might have leaked the secret. However, they had realized that their suspicion had been ridiculous. After all, would Yi Shiwen have put his life on stake if he had leaked the secret? In fact, these people had become increasingly stunned with every new method that Yi Shiwen had used. Is he even human? Such a ferocious man has already appeared in the younger generation. A disciple of True Martial University said in disbelief. Yi Ziwen's reputation had naturally spread far and wide in the True Martial University. But that reputation was only as a newcomer. However, he had become so outstanding when not even 100 years had passed. So, how could these pompous senior elites endure this? It's lucky that such a man is in my True Martial University. Bai Jingwei let out a smile from the corner of his mouth and said, he was delighted after having killed all the people of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa. He was loyal and devoted to the True Martial University. Therefore, he would be glad if more such talents appeared in the university. He was a bit moved since the older generation was being replaced by the new generation. However, he wasn't jealous in any way. Yeah, we've escaped a calamity after being trapped. Someone said gladly. An unexpected accident had occurred while setting up an ambush to kill Shokun. And all of them might have been killed if Yi Shiwen didn't have such formidable strength. No one would have survived. The tragic fate of the people from the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa would have been theirs instead. Sorry we're late. Suddenly, a man's voice came from afar. His voice surged about and arrived just like the sound of thunder. It wasn't very loud. However, it had still dug into the bottom of everyone's heart. Everyone promptly looked up. A team of dozens of people had broken the void and arrived in the sky whilst treading flying lights. They were headed by an old man who seemed to be in his 30s. He had sword-like eyebrows and star-like eyes. He looked extremely ice-cold. He was dressed in a black robe. The rest of the people behind him were also dressed in similar clothes. Moreover, every one of them was an elite expert. All of them were in the late stage of the half-step Great Sage realm. People with such strength could be considered as elites. In fact, this team was comparable to the combined lineup of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa. This was a team of the True Martial University's Law Enforcement Hall. The Law Enforcement Hall was an organization that used to manage law. So, they had the strength and skill to suppress outstanding heroes. They used to handle all the untamed geniuses of the university. These were the people who were most likely to provoke matters. After all, could an ordinary person have so much courage? The leader of this team was a member of the Heavenly Punishment faction. This faction was the most elite group of the Law Enforcement Hall. His name was Fan Yicheng. "Sorry, Brother Bai, we've arrived late," Fan Yicheng coldly said. He shot a glance on the surroundings. He could tell that it was in a complete mess. A war had obviously taken place at this place. The space that had broken down far away in the sky hadn't automatically restored yet. So, it was clear that the fight had ended recently. The ground was dyed in blood, and corpses were lying everywhere. So, it must have been a bitter fight. However, it seems that we didn't need to come. You've already settled everything on your own. A rare smile appeared on Fan Yicheng's face as he saw the ground littered with corpses. He was a member of the Law Enforcement Hall. So, it was impossible for him to not get affected by this scene. The people of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa were rebels and traitors in his eyes. Therefore, all of them needed to die. It was just that he was a bit surprised. Bai Jingwei's strength wasn't weak. However, those people on the enemy's side had also been elites. So, how had they gotten killed in abundance? Moreover, the True Martial University's team looked in good condition. They didn't seem to have suffered a huge damage. Bai Jingwei saw Fan Yicheng's expression and quickly understood what he was thinking. So, he forced a smile and explained everything to him. "Yi Shiwen." Fan Yicheng's complexion turned serious. He wouldn't have had any problem if it had been someone else. However, this man was unfortunately Yi Shiwen. Fan Yicheng didn't have a good impression of Yi Shiwen. In fact, the people of the Law Enforcement Hall had encouraged him to lead their team in this Devil World competition and kill Yi Shiwen. He hadn't taken this matter seriously back then. After all, it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to contend against him no matter how strong he was. Yi Shiwen had to put so much effort in fighting with Qiao Yu. So, Yi Shiwen obviously couldn't be compared with him. Fan Yicheng was a member of the Heavenly Punishment faction. He had never participated in such competitions since he believed that such competitions weren't that important. So, he wasn't interested in it. The members of the Heavenly Punishment faction used to temper themselves through life or death struggles on ordinary days. Their strength was far more above what ordinary people could imagine. Fan Yicheng was of Bai Jingwei's age. However, his strength was above that of Shou Kun. In fact, he was about to enter the Great Sage realm. However, his aim was similar to that of Shou Kun. He didn't want to slow down after having entered the Great Sage realm. He wanted to lay a good foundation in the half-step Great Sage realm so that he could make the breakthrough into an extremely profound realm of the Great Sage realm in one fell swoop when the time would come. He had been very confident that he could kill Shou Kun after participating in Bai Jingwei's ambush plan. In fact, he looked down on Shou Kun. It was difficult to deal with Shou Kun. However, he could kill Shou Kun in one thunderous strike if he went all out. After all, Shou Kun was ranked 6th on the merit list, whereas he was on the 2nd spot. It could be said that the True Martial University had declined over the years. However, its background had become incredibly profound because of dominating the southern region for a long interval of time. The True Martial University would have a place in the top 10 positions in every Devil World competition. 2 individuals from the True Martial University were in the top 10 this year. So, it could be said that it was a very strong year for the university. Fan Yicheng hadn't expected that this matter would leak out. Therefore, he had rushed over here as soon as he had obtained the news. However, he had found that the people of 10,000 Beast Villa and Xian Yuan Palace Hall had already been executed once he got here. Moreover, he had soon found out that they had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had repeatedly opposed the law enforcement hall. However, Fan Yiqing had heard about him only recently. Yi Shiwen had killed very low-level disciples of the law enforcement hall in the beginning. Such people used to die every day in the law enforcement hall. So, it hadn't been a big deal. But then, he had finally grabbed the attention of the Heavenly Punishment Faction's elites after he had defeated Chao Yuyu. However, the disparity between Chao Yuyu and Shou Kun was similar to the difference between heaven and earth. They couldn't be compared. After all, it would have been difficult even for Fan Yicheng to deal with Shou Kun if he had come across him. But, Shou Kun had been killed by Yi Shiwen now. Especially, those experts of the law enforcement hall behind Fan Yicheng had thought that it was just a made-up story. In fact, they wouldn't have believed it if Bai Jingwei and the other strong experts hadn't testified. Fan Yicheng's complexion had turned solemn. However, it wasn't clear what he was thinking. The news of the slaughtering of the disciples of the 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xian Yuan Palace Hall spread to all teams of experts. And it suddenly caused a huge sensation, as if a stone had stirred up the waves. It wasn't a secret that Shou Kun had malicious intentions towards the true martial university. In fact, an old expert like Shou Kun was one of the individuals who used to get maximum attention of the people in every Devil World competition. He could also be weighed among the powerhouses. It was no news that he had repeatedly targeted the true martial university. The 10,000 Beasts Villa wasn't only an arch-enemy of the true martial university. It was also their main target. Similarly, True Martial University was the target of the 10,000 Beasts Villa. True Martial University's people hated Shou Kun. However, they had no way to deal with him because of his tyrannical strength. Moreover, he rarely used to fight with people. For example, Bai Jiansong had sent a war challenge to Shou Kun, and Bai Jiansong had been very successful the previous year. However, Shou Kun hadn't accepted the challenge. Therefore, several people would show contempt for his attitude. However, they didn't doubt his strength. After all, he had been ranked 6th on the merit list. So, no one could dare to look down upon him. However, Shou Kun had died now. So, the rankings had automatically shifted up by one place after his name had been wiped out from the merit list. Many people would have refused to believe it if this were to be just hearsay. However, it had to be real since his name had been wiped out from the merit list. It had caused a huge sensation for a moment. Then, another piece of news spread soon after that. Li Yifeng had also died at the same time. This was extremely shocking news. Li Yifeng's ranking wasn't better than that of Shou Kun. However, he was also ranked among the top 20 big personalities. He possessed incredible strength. However, he had also died at the same time. The entire matter gradually unfolded in front of everyone as this news spread out more and more. Chapter 620. Bai Jingwei had initially been ranked 9th on the merit list. But he had moved to the 8th rank now. He had planned to kill Shou Kun. However, who would have imagined that Shou Kun would find out about his plan and launch a surprise attack on them in advance along with the experts of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall. Shou Kun had come close to killing several experts of the True Martial University, and they had almost suffered a crushing defeat. However, someone had moved into action right then. It was Yi Shiwen. He had thoroughly defeated Shou Kun with a powerful attack. Then he had taken advantage of the situation and killed Li Yifeng as well. He had killed 2 senior experts who had been ranked among the top 20 personalities. This method was extremely world-shaking. In fact, another rumor said that Shou Kun had made the breakthrough into the Great Sage realm on the spot. However, he had still been killed by Yi Shiwen. However, nobody believed this rumor. After all, Yi Shiwen was an insignificant expert of the Sage Great Perfection realm. Many people believed that he was just a non-entity. He wasn't even worth mentioning. He was an expert of the Sage Great Perfection realm. But he had defeated an expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm. It was already equal to snatching good luck from the heavens. Was it that easy to cross the barrier between the great sage realm and the sage realm? This barrier was as big as the separation between heaven and earth for many people. These experts who had participated in this devil world competition were well-known figures among the core disciples. However, they still lacked strength while facing the threshold of the great sage realm. Moreover, they had never heard about any secret method that could suddenly promote a person's cultivation from the sage realm to the great sage realm. Therefore, this rumor was only considered as ridiculous. And it quickly got overshadowed by many of the other rumors. As per the rumors, Yi Shiwen had used some secret method as well as great divine power, and killed 2 senior experts who were ranked among the top 20 experts on the merit list. Many people felt that he had used some secret method. However, it was still extremely shocking and incredible. Yi Ziwen's ranking on the merit list showed that thousands of experts were still above him. Consequently, Yi Shiwen had suddenly become famous as a young hero even though he had been an unknown entity before. However, many voices of doubt had emerged against Yi Shiwen when his fame rose all of a sudden. He's just a lucky boy who uses cheap tricks? He has certainly obtained this cheap advantage because of joining hands with Bai Jingwei. Someone who didn't believe the rumors said. Several people believed this statement. In fact, much more people believed this statement as compared to the rumor that said that Yi Shiwen had killed Shou Kuan and Li Yifeng after he had increased his martial power enormously using a secret method. After all, this statement seemed much more reasonable than that rumor. Why did he have to be so rampant? The people of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa will certainly get offended. He'll have to face the encirclement and pursuit of these experts when the time comes. Then it'll be a dead end for him. He may have some secret method for increasing his martial power, but he can't use it again and again. After all, such methods always have huge repercussions. Someone said somewhat disdainfully. He looked down on Yi Shiwen even more after he came to know that Yi Shiwen had used some secret method. Such secret methods possessed outstanding might. However, they often had irreversible repercussions. And the more powerful a secret method was, the more severe its repercussions would be. Yi Shiwen had killed Shou Kuan with the strength of the sage Great Perfection Realm. So, one could well imagine how powerful this secret method must have been. However, more powerful also meant that it would have more serious side effects. Consequently, it wouldn't be that easy to survive while facing the encirclement and pursuit of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa. Moreover, a thought arose in the minds of many people who had heard this. A nonentity of the sage Great Perfection Realm had killed Shou Kuan, the same Shou Kuan who had been a peerless expert in the half-step Great Sage Realm? So, this secret method must be extremely ferocious. Therefore, it would have a very big side effect. However, countless people still wanted to obtain it. They wanted to obtain it for the moment when they would need it. It may have big side effects. But, would those side effects be so serious that they would lead to death? The chances of a person's survival who has such a secret technique to protect himself would rise enormously in this devil world. These people wanted to find Yi Shiwen for various purposes. They wanted to steal his martial techniques, secrets methods, and so on. The Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa had lost many experts. On top of that, they had suffered great humiliation, and their vitality had sustained a huge injury. Therefore, they weren't ready to let go this matter. They vowed to hunt down and kill Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's heinous act has made us very angry. He is a sworn enemy of my Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa from today. Anyone who gives us his information will get a reward of 10 million primary spirit dawn. And whoever kills him will get 500 million primary spirit dawn. This news set off a storm as soon as it came out. There was no doubt that even a great sage expert would willingly try to find Yi Shiwen for these many primary spirit dawn. However, they obviously wouldn't go to find him personally. It would be those big forces behind them that would set out after they got some clues. 500 million primary spirit dawn was a huge amount. However, it was nothing for colossuses like the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa. Both Li Yifeng and Shou Kun were top geniuses who had been nurtured by them with the utmost care. And both of them had unexpectedly died at Yi Zaiwen's hands now. So, how could they be willing to leave this matter? Suddenly, Yi Shiwen was in the limelight, and everyone's focus was fixed on him regardless of the purpose they had in mind. Especially, the reward issued by the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa had made countless people restless. And many outstanding talents who were believed to have peerless martial arts accomplishments left to look for Yi Shiwen in quick succession. After all, they wanted to obtain these rewards. It could be reckoned that the person who'd kill Yi Shiwen would reach heaven in a single bound. One could directly reach the Great Sage Realm depending upon the consumption of Primary Spirit Dawn if they had 500 million Primary Spirit Dawn in their hands. Many people were confident that they could finish this mission. After all of them were outstanding talents. The true martial university hadn't made any noise at first. But it finally moved into action at this time. Bai Jingwei and few other leaders of the true martial university issued a joint statement: whoever dares to help the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa better be prepared to be hunted down by the true martial university. Yi Shiwen is under the protection of the true martial university. So, whoever tries to cause trouble for him will provoke the wrath of the entire true martial university. The true martial university had declined. It couldn't be compared with the true martial university of the old. However, it had declined only in comparison to its status of those days. It was still a colossus as far as the other forces were concerned. Therefore, this statement had immediately deterred the people who had been ready to cause trouble. The amount of Primary Spirit Dawn was huge indeed. However, they'd need to be alive in order to make use of those Primary Spirit Dawn. The true martial university's intervention had made this extremely chaotic matter even more confusing. In fact, it was equivalent to having an acrimonious falling out with the 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xianyuan Palace Hall. The 10,000 Beasts Villa and the Xianyuan Palace Hall had suffered heavy losses. So, they had been the victims in everyone's opinion initially. Therefore, many people had believed that it would be worthwhile to use an unknown boy like Yi Shiwen for quelling the rage of these two big forces. However, this matter had taken the shape of a confrontation between two forces now. And this was a huge deal. The loss of one or two individuals usually couldn't sway the foundation between two forces. After all, making compromises with each other was of utmost importance. However, it was said that a violent quarrel had broken out between the leaders of the true martial university on the issue of whether they should protect Yi Shiwen from death or not. Some people believed that they would be treating Yi Shiwen fairly as long as they weren't causing trouble for other forces for his sake. After all, Yi Zaiwen's life was still insignificant in comparison to the entire true martial university. However, Bai Jingwei stood his ground against the opinions of the masses. He eventually facilitated the resolution that he would protect Yi Shiwen from death. The true martial university had several huge conflicts with the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa after this resolution was made. And both sides suffered casualties as a result. The desolate areas of the entire devil world suddenly exploded and began to boil like a pot. Everyone's attention was fixed on this matter. It must be said that Yi Shiwen should have been one of the leaders in all this. However, he had suddenly disappeared instead. Everyone was endlessly arguing for his matter. But he had disappeared without a trace. In fact, it seemed as if he had never existed in this world. Some people said that he was a coward and was hiding somewhere. However, he didn't appear no matter what people said. Inside the boundless Devil Beast Mountain range, endless devil energy was surging towards a place whilst taking the shape of a huge funnel. It seemed as if a monster was sucking in all the devil energy from the environment. It had created a big spectacle. However, many devil beasts didn't dare to approach that place. After all, devil beasts weren't like humans. They could only hide far away on coming across such a powerful being. Inside the mountain range, Ling Fei was pacing back and forth outside a cave. She appeared somewhat impatient. She would peek inside the cave from time to time whilst complaining, "So boring. Dai Yi Shiwen. Stinky Yi Shiwen. He had even said that he would take me to the human world. But he has deceived me." Elder brother hasn't cheated you. He just has to deal with some matters in the devil world first. Xiao Ya's crisp voice came from the other side. Her delicate and small face was filled with a serious look. Well, you always take his side. This is very boring. Ling Fei pouted her small mouth whilst being dissatisfied. She would usually have a comeback to anything. However, she would feel defeated whenever she would see Xiao Ya's face. Ling Fei would sometimes seem like an unreasonable person who liked to create a scene. Well, only sometimes. That's all. However, she felt helpless while facing Xiao Ya. After all, Xiao Ya would only recognize whatever Yi Shiwen would say as right. Ling Fei couldn't say what she wanted to when she looked at Xiao Ya's serious appearance. However, she also knew that Yi Shiwen was still in the Devil World competition, and that she could follow him once the Devil World competition ended. She became excited as she thought of this since she had gotten bored of watching the same Devil World again and again. In fact, she had already thought to go and take a look at the human world since it was like a world filled with life and beauty in the fables. Moreover, she had found that it would be much more exciting than all her past experiences since she would often come across people who were looking for trouble. And she had found this after she had followed Yi Shiwen for these last few months. The battle between Yi Shiwen and the troublemakers wouldn't look impressive to her. However, she would still watch it with great interest. After all, who would dare to attack her in her clan? She was immersed in her imagination. Meanwhile, the devil energy in the surroundings began to enter the cave at a great speed and formed a huge cyclone. Bang! Suddenly, a boundless majestic aura emerged out throughout the mountain range. Then, the devil energy and the principles in the surroundings began to crazily twist and squeeze under this imposing aura. A long time passed. Then this imposing aura finally disappeared without a trace, and a cyan figure came out from it. Yi Ziwen's face exposed a smile after he saw the two individuals who were standing guard at the entrance. He had finally succeeded after several months of closed-door training. He had finally made the breakthrough into Sage Accomplished Realm. He had finally accomplished the cultivation of Sage Realm. Chapter 621. He had consumed 300 million primary spirit dawn in the last few months of closed-door training. However, he had no regrets. After all, his fighting prowess had once again taken a huge leap after he had made the breakthrough into the Sage Accomplished Realm. This was the most accomplished stage one could reach during the cultivation in the entire Sage Realm. Consequently, his entire person had transformed now. Sage Realm was the realm in which the transformation of body would take place. So, one's body would have transformed completely after they had cultivated to the Sage Accomplished Realm. It would become a perfect body. In fact, it would be the most perfect body which had transformed under the effect of the entire world's power. The ultimate goal of martial cultivators was to become immortals like gods. And what is God? God is majestic. God is invincible. God is perfect. God is supreme. In short, all the praises of the entire world can be used for God. God's body is perfect and formidable. The body of a martial cultivator who had come out of Sage Realm might not be extremely tyrannical, especially in comparison to the bodies of great sages and the almighties beyond them. However, it would still be considered perfect. Yi Ziwen's current appearance could only be considered as delicate and slim. It wasn't outstanding. However, his three foundations, soul, vitality and body, had completely transformed and were radiating health and vigor. Yi Shiwen had made the breakthrough into the Sage Accomplished Realm. So, he was confident that he could explode an ordinary expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm in one punch. He could even defeat a common Heaven's Pride expert with ease. However, he knew that he still hadn't reached the pinnacle. This was because he knew that he might still not be a match for people like Shou Kun and Bai Jingwei. After all, these people were the Heaven's Pride experts among the Heaven's Pride level experts. They had tyrannical strength and profound accumulation. So, Yi Shiwen was still slightly inferior to them. However, he would be able to defeat people like Shou Kun depending solely upon his own strength if he was given some time to stabilize in this realm. Therefore, it could be said that Yi Zaiwen's current strength had made him qualified to walk unhindered among the core disciples. Only the true disciples were above him now. Those true disciples were very few. However, each of them was far more tyrannical than an ordinary Heaven's Pride expert. Moreover, they had the hope of making a breakthrough to the level of Supreme Lord in the future. On the other hand, Yi Shiwen had no hopes of reaching that stage at present. Yi Shiwen, you've finally come out. These last few months have been extremely boring. Ling Fei complained to Yi Shiwen. She had nearly gotten bored to death in these last few months when Yi Shiwen had been in closed-door training. In fact, she might have gone insane if Xiaoya hadn't said a few things to her from time to time. These frequent closed-door trainings were very hard to endure in her opinion. After all, she had smoothly cultivated beyond Yi Zaiwen's cultivation. She had smoothly made the breakthroughs step by step. Therefore, closed-door trainings and what-not weren't practical concepts in her opinion. Yi Shiwen grinned in response. A few months had passed. However, he didn't feel that too much time had passed. And that's because this was the easiest closed-door training that he had ever had. And it was only because a great sage-level expert like Ling Fei had been keeping watch outside. Therefore, this experience had been much smoother for him than any other thing. The last few months had passed in an instant. However, many world-shaking matters had taken place in this period. Yi Shiwen hadn't been present outside. However, he had been keeping an eye, especially on the people who had been stirring up trouble outside. Therefore, he knew that many people had been planning to take his head in order to obtain that reward of 500 million primary spirit dawn. Yi Shiwen sneered. Some people are thinking about using me for making profit? Let them come and try. Let's see how many reckless people will come to die. The true Martial University had issued the statement that they would protect Yi Shiwen. In fact, they had said that death would be lingering upon the person who'd dare to go after him. Whoever would dare to make a move would be exterminated. Yi Shiwen wasn't a kind-hearted person to being with. But he would be even worse to the errant people who'd make a conspiracy against him. Who's there? Ling Fei looked to the other side. She looked at a distant place as she shouted. Her shout transformed into sonic arrows, smashed the void with lightning speed, and swept towards that figure. Ha! That figure broke through the vast sky while avoiding the sonic arrows. He had used a mysterious agility skill and had instantly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen to kill him. He then slashed out a sword light, and it instantly reached to Yi Zaiwen's forehead like a flying fairy. It had seemed as if a sword had pierced through the sky and landed in front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Zaiwen's face exposed a stunned look. However, his hand's movement didn't become disordered. This was the biggest difference between him and Ling Fei. After all, Long Fei had grown up in a favorable environment. However, Yi Shiwen was different in this regard. In fact, it wasn't clear how many times he had experienced life and death battles in his entire life. So, he was accustomed to being calm and composed even in the most dangerous situations. That's because he knew that getting nervous was pointless. Only being calm and composed was right. The sword light speed was extremely fast. In fact, it ripped apart a huge black rift in the space as if it were a painting as it rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Its target was clear. Its speed was fast. However, Yi Zaiwen's speed was even faster. A big hand suddenly stretched out. The sword light was about to strike Yi Zaiwen's forehead. But the big hand suddenly transformed into boundless golden lights and grabbed that sword light. Bang! Every bit of sword light that came in contact with the golden lights broke down and transformed into fine dust. It couldn't pose any fatal threat to Yi Shiwen. Humph! Yi Shiwen coldly snorted. Then a big hand stretched out. It passed through the horizon, and the surrounding space immediately got locked by him. This was a kind of magical power of a great sage. His fighting prowess had already far surpassed Sage Realm and had reached to this point. He couldn't lock the space as easily as Ling Fei had done earlier. However, he had also done it to a certain extent. A figure appeared in the sky as expected. It couldn't remain hidden anymore. It was a slightly petite figure. It was a normal-looking man. His entire body was dark, and his face seemed to be covered with thick fog. His face wasn't clearly visible. His figure was entirely different from the tall and sturdy figure of a common devil. Yi Shiwen, be careful. He's a member of the Hidden Devil Clan. Yi Mo promptly reminded. Yi Ziwen's expression suddenly turned cold. After all, this man was a member of the Hidden Devil Clan. This clan was one of the 8 big devil clans. The Fallen Angel clan could said to be the most mysterious and noble clan among the 8 major devil clans. But the Hidden Devil Clan was extremely strange on the other hand. In fact, it was famous as a clan of assassins in the devil world. They were born with the ability to assassinate. In fact, all the abilities that they were born with were suited for assassination. It could be said that a sage-level expert from this clan could assassinate even a great sage by catching them off guard. Great sages had dreadful strength and divine sense. So, they would easily find out if an ordinary person approached them, even if they hadn't been paying full attention to the situation around them. So, one could well imagine how outstanding the stealth skill of the Hidden Devil Clan was. Yi Shiwen hadn't sensed him. It would have taken him some time to discover the assassin if Ling Fei hadn't found and exposed him first. These experts of the Hidden Devil Clan were masters in the art of assassination. But this didn't mean that they weren't ferocious in fighting head-on. However, many people would often forget their dreadful strength. How could they kill a great sage depending upon the strength of Sage Realm if they didn't have enough attacking strength? A great sage may be standing motionless and not paying attention to anything around them. However, it must be noted that the great sage's body would still be extremely tyrannical. In fact, a great sage could explode an entire mountain range with the flick of a finger. Yi Ziwen's expression had turned solemn. Provoking these natural assassins was very troublesome. Even Yi Mo had very rarely talked about them in his introductions in the past. They were very troublesome because one could face these assassins of the Hidden Devil Clan anytime and anywhere. The Hidden Devil Clan would kill the opposite party without any hesitation, anytime, anywhere, and in any situation. They would have no scruples whatsoever. Moreover, they weren't scared to run into a dreadful target. Instead, the thing that they would be most scared about was meeting a shameless person who didn't care about using any method. This was also the reason why Shou Kun had earned a bad reputation despite having tyrannical strength. He could have obviously advanced to the Great Sage Realm. However, he hadn't done so. Instead, he had planned to bully the younger generation. Such reputation wasn't good. Who are you? And why are you looking for me? Yi Shiwen looked at the opposite party with his profound gaze and coldly asked. Yi Shiwen had clearly understood that he was this enemy's target. After all, the recent attack had made it evident that this assassin hadn't run into him by accident. He had initially thought that this expert of the Hidden Devil Clan might have accidentally run into him. After all, this was a blood and flesh mill-like battlefield of humans and devils where both parties were slaughtering each other. Both parties would go all out in order to kill the enemy if they came across each other. There was nothing to say in this regard. However, Yi Ziwen's and Ling Fei's situation was obviously a bit special. That youth of the Hidden Devil Clan replied in a humming voice, "You're Yi Shiwen, right? I've heard that there is a reward of 500 million primary spirit dawn on your head." Ha ha ha. Ha ha. Yi Shiwen laughed and exposed his pure white teeth. So, even the devils know about this matter. However, I don't know if you will live to get that reward. This expert of the Hidden Devil Clan is amusing. He wants to receive a reward from the humans. I don't know what to say. Is he reckless or is he simply courting death? Naturally, I have my methods. It's enough as long as I'm sure that you're Yi Shiwen. That youth of the Hidden Devil Clan sneered. It was clear that he didn't give importance to Yi Ziwen's words. He was just thinking about his own methods. Don't tell me they've dared to collaborate with the enemies. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes. There was an ample amount of killing intention in them. The deep hatred between humans and devils had already surmounted the barriers of the two worlds. So, the people who would dare to collaborate with the devils would certainly draw the collective strangulation of the entire human race. After all, matters like that of devil worship cult couldn't be allowed to take place again. You don't need to be concerned about it. Just go to hell. and tell the king of hell that the name of the man who had killed you is Yin Luo. That youth of the hidden devil clan suddenly shouted. Then, the long sword in his hand began to make a sizzling sound. And, stunning sword beams soared to the sky the next moment. He then suddenly trod forward. He transformed into a meteor, penetrated through the vast sky, and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. The long sword issued a metal clanging sound and smashed down. Bang! The entire space was distorted, and the mountain on which Yi Shiwen had been standing collapsed in a flash. Chapter 622. On the other side, Ling Fei was intrigued by that assassin Yin Luo. The entire mountain range had collapsed. But she didn't care. She had just protected Xiaoya from getting injured from the powerful blast. She just muttered, "Yin Luo? You're surnamed Yin?" The hidden devil clan was worthy of being a renowned race of assassins among the devil clans. The enemy's attack had arrived in front of Yi Shiwen in an instant. His speed was extremely quick. His long sword rushed straight for Yi Ziwen's soul as if it possessed some magical power. That sword then slashed at his soul. The intent was to cut Yi Ziwen's entire body into two halves. His sword emitted incredible divine beams. The dreadful strength of the late stage of half-step great sage realm had fully manifested. This man was a Heaven's Pride expert in the hidden devil clan. So, an ordinary person would certainly meet a disastrous end if they came across him. However, Yi Shiwen moved into action at this time. He shot his fist, and it transformed into endless starlights which then interweaved to form a huge net. Yin Luo's long sword got obstructed by that huge net before it could reach Yi Shiwen. The long sword couldn't advance even an inch. His long sword couldn't pierce Yi Ziwen's palm. Yi Ziwen's palm seemed to be gilded. The rays of light emitted by his palm contained incredible might. What? How can he have such tyrannical flesh? Yin Luo's complexion turned pale with fright. He hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would be able to grab his sword barehanded. His sword wasn't a great sage tool. However, it was surely a top-tier sage tool. In fact, even some of his peers who belonged to other great clans in the devil race didn't have such powerful body that they could stop his sage tool barehanded. He was left stunned by this. So, he suddenly trod away. His body then began to distort crazily, and he disappeared from Yi Ziwen's eyes. This was obviously the renowned agility technique of the hidden devil clan, the 9 Spirit Shadows. It was an extremely clever agility-type martial art. Suddenly, 9 figures appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. Each of them looked exactly the same, and all of them together launched an attack on Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen knew that all these 9 figures couldn't be real bodies. It was highly unlikely that the opposite party was controlling 9 bodies at the same time like Yi Shiwen would do with the Star Colossus avatar. So, 8 of them had to be fake. However, the problem was how to decide which among them was the real one. After all, the real one would get an opportunity to launch an attack on him if he made a mistake in distinguishing between the real and fake ones, and attacked the fake ones instead. This was the most troublesome aspect about dealing with the hidden devils. One could never tell which figure was the real one. It's useless. You can't distinguish between the real and the fake. This is the supreme devil technique of my race. Consider yourself fortunate since you've gotten a chance to witness it. You're truly fortunate. However, it's impossible for you to see through this technique. The 9 figures of Yin Luo simultaneously said. The voices came from all directions. It was simply impossible to determine which one was real. Yi Shiwen coldly snorted. I can't see through them. I can't see through them even with my divine eyes. However, it doesn't matter. I'll just annihilate all of them. Then, I'll know which one is real and which ones are fake. Then, the real elemental energy on his body began to boil. And, the small universe inside his body began to rotate frantically. Endless star power began to expand, and formed a small universe. All 9 figures of Yin Lu were engulfed by that universe. The stars began to ignite inside the universe at this time. They smashed down upon those 9 figures of Yin Luo under the control of Yi Ziwen's will. Bang! 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 Each figure of Yin Luo transformed into a mass of devil energy under the lightning-fast attacks, and disappeared. Found you. One of those figures of Yin Luo didn't fade. Instead, it blew away the stars in one fist blow. Yi Shiwen hadn't hoped that these attacks would annihilate Yin Luo anyway. He had just wanted to find his real figure. And he had achieved his goal now. That Yi Shiwen shouted. He immediately trod at an incredible pace. His speed was faster than that of Yin Luo. He had arrived in front of Yin Luo in an instant. Boundless sword intentions condensed in his hand. Then, these sharp sword intentions suddenly slashed down under Yi Ziwen's control. Yin Luo was greatly alarmed by this. He had just now blasted away the stars. And he had immediately understood Yi Ziwen's plan, to use this method to find out which one was his real figure. Consequently, he became terrified. He had never encountered such a troublesome evil scheme. It could be said that the entire devil world used to shake under the power of his 9 spirit shadows. Everyone would admire the 9 spirit shadows of the hidden devil clan. And nobody would dare to say that the 9 spirit shadows technique wasn't good. He hadn't cultivated it to the peak. However, it was already extremely ferocious. In fact, he had never suffered a defeat when he had used 9 spirit shadows technique in the past. However, he had now lost whilst using it in the face of Yi Shiwen. Moreover, Yi Shiwen had found a method to decode it within a very short time. This had obviously happened because Yin Luo hadn't cultivated it to a perfect state. The 9 spirit shadows could divide a person if it was practiced to the peak. And the divided figures would have the potential to attack. He would be able to split up into 9 powerful avatars after cultivating this technique to the accomplished state. The avatars could last only for a limited time. However, the situation would change from 1-on-1 to 9-on-1 for some time. This was the reason why the 9 spirit shadows technique was famous in the devil world. The duration for which it would work wasn't quite long. However, it was enough for the hidden devil clan who knew how to seize every minute and every second. What had made him even more terrified was Yi Ziwen's sword technique. It was just a simple sword. However, it had made him understand that Yi Ziwen's skill of sword technique had reached to perfection. In fact, it was much better than his own. How had he cultivated it to perfection? He had seen Yi Ziwen's terrifying fist technique just now. And even his sword technique appeared to be so terrifying now. Yin Luo believed that to know everything was to know nothing. Therefore, he had been focused on perfecting his sword technique since childhood. However, he felt as if his worldview had crumbled significantly now after he had met Yi Shiwen. He was also a Heaven's Pride expert of his generation in the Hidden Devil clan. He also had his own pride and confidence. Yi Shiwen grinned. The confidence of this expert of the Hidden Devil clan seems have thoroughly collapsed. He must know that I can firmly suppress him in everything, no matter whether it is speed, sword technique, or anything else. Yin Luo promptly brandished his sword. The sage-level longsword emitted incredible rays of light and went up to greet the incoming attack. A huge sound of explosion sounded. 2 longswords had collided in the sky and produced huge shock waves. The shock waves swept out, rippling in the air like sea waves. It was a very terrifying sight. Crack! The sound of breaking of bones was heard amidst the sound of explosion. It was very sharp and unpleasant to hear. Yin Luo screamed and fell on his knees. His left leg couldn't withstand this tremendous impact. It had broken down, and he had fallen onto his knees. His complexion had changed significantly at this time. He had finally understood that he had underestimated Yi Shiwen. Any fist technique or sword technique of his would be inferior to that of Yi Shiwen. However, these weren't the most important things in Yi Ziwen's case. The most important thing was that Yi Shiwen possessed an outstanding and top-tier body. This represented the so-called saying all tricks are useless in front of absolute strength. Yin Luo might not lose to Yi Shiwen as far as level of swordsmanship was concerned. However, just one attack from Yi Shiwen had almost crippled him in the real fight. So, it was clear that his body was far inferior to that of Yi Shiwen. What was crushing? This was crushing. Yi Shiwen lifted the long sword that had condensed from his sword intention without any hesitation. Then, that long sword smashed down once again. It gave birth to a scene of doomsday. This long sword carried unrivaled power as it flew in the vast world. It destroyed the entire world. This was the might of his buried heaven sword. It seemed as if the entire world would perish under the might of his sword light. Yin Luo clenched his teeth. He tried to endure the severe pain, and slashed out his sword. It gave birth to a country of devils. Assassins were present all over in this country. Screams, chaos, slaughtering, and bloodbath could be seen everywhere. This was the sword intention of his sword technique. It was as extraordinary as the majority of the creative concepts of the devil clans. It brought about chaos and slaughtering. Bang! However, Yi Zaiwen's long sword smoothly forced into Yin Luo's world of swordsmanship like a hot knife through butter. His long sword seemed like a sword that would extinguish the world. The atmosphere evaporated, the sky shattered, the rivers got cut down into two, and the earth crumbled within the split second of it piercing into the world. Everything collapsed and broke down under the might of his sword. This is impossible. I can't accept this. Yin Luo roared. However, his sword intention couldn't withstand even a single blow from Yi Shiwen no matter how unwilling he was to accept this. Yi Shiwen had thoroughly displayed the so-called saying all tricks are useless in front of absolute strength. He had crushed his enemy depending solely upon brute strength. Bang! Yin Luo's entire sword intention collapsed, and he got blown away by the tremendous power. He then spouted a mouthful of blood since his internal organs had gotten damaged by the shock. Yi Shiwen was obviously a very shrewd and ruthless person. So, how could he miss such a good opportunity? He stepped out, surmounted the vast space, and arrived in front of Yin Luo in an instant. However, he didn't use a sword this time. He just shot a punch. That punch then transformed into a sword and smashed down. Ah! Yin Luo screamed as he got chopped into two halves. Then, Yi Shiwen grabbed Yin Luo's soul in order to examine the many secrets of the 9 Spirit Shadows technique. However, Yi Shiwen could only roughly see a few secrets. He didn't get enough time to examine all the secrets. Yin Luo's soul grew bigger and bigger in his hand as if it was under someone's control. Finally, it exploded with a loud bang. Yi Zaiwen's expression turned ice cold. This was a method used by the devil clans to control some of their important members who knew too many secrets. All those secrets would get leaked if they fell into an enemy's hands. Therefore, many clans would use this method to protect their secrets. In fact, many forces in the true martial world also had such a way. This was just to guard oneself against contingencies. However, Yi Shiwen hadn't expected that Yin Luo would be an important member of the hidden devil clan. Could a trivial half-step great sage expert become an important member of the hidden devil clan? One must know that the hidden devil clan was one of the 8 major devil clans. They didn't have an outstanding reputation like some other clans. However, they still couldn't be underestimated. After all, great sages were present in abundance in this clan. In fact, great sages were nothing in this clan, let alone half-step great sage experts. This had truly puzzled Yi Shiwen. He felt as if he was missing something. Anyway, Yi Shiwen was back in action. Chapter 623, Plunders Wealth. Yi Shiwen didn't hurry to head out after he had killed that young expert of the hidden devil clan. Instead, he began deducing the cultivation method of the 9 spirit shadows. Yi Shiwen had just a glimpse of Yin Luo's soul and memory. He hadn't gotten the chance to see many aspects. He had just seen a few surface parts. Therefore, he was having trouble in deducing this technique since he couldn't form a complete concept. In fact, he couldn't even build a general outline of this technique, let alone deducing the specific cultivation method. Yi Shiwen had already consumed around 100 million primary spirit dawn. So, he had no choice but to give up the idea of cultivating the 9 spirit shadows technique for the time being. Yi Shiwen was quite frustrated. However, the fact that he could deduce it superficially would already be enough to leave the entire devil world in shock. 9 spirit shadows was the hidden devil clan's own technique. Its fame shook the entire devil world. One would certainly think of 9 spirit shadows technique if the name of the hidden devil clan was mentioned to them. After all, one could generate 9 powerful avatars after they had cultivated the 9 spirit shadows technique to the peak. This method could be said to be against the heaven's will. However, not many people would want to cultivate the 9 spirit shadows technique even if they knew about its capability. There were 2 reasons behind this. The first one was that the hidden devil clan had kept this technique hidden to such an extent that not everyone even in their own clan had gotten the opportunity to inherit it. The other reason was that the 9 spirit shadows technique had been created on the basis of the special physique of the hidden devils. So, other clans couldn't learn it. Such a situation was very normal in the devil world since there were several clans here. Every clan was completely different from the other. Each clan had their own trademark power techniques which were very difficult for the other clans to learn. This was completely different from the human race. The physiques of people in the human race were different from each other because of different living areas. However, there wasn't much difference between them apart from this. They were all same on the inside. Everyone's body from inside was same unless one possessed a special bloodline. Therefore, the power techniques among humans were common. That's why it was crucial to look after those techniques. Therefore, Yi Shiwen might not have been able to cultivate the 9 spirit shadows technique even if he had obtained its complete version. That's because one mustn't look at the external appearance of the experts of the hidden devil clan. It was almost similar to that of humans. But there was a huge difference from inside between both physiques. It wasn't same at all. There was no way to treat them equally. This was also the reason why Yi Shiwen couldn't completely deduce the 9 spirit shadows technique even after he had consumed 100 million primary spirit dawn. He must deduce the theory of 9 spirit shadows technique first. Then he must create this technique from scratch as per his physique. This difficulty was no less than creating the 9 spirit shadows technique from thin air. Therefore, he had given up the idea of cultivating the 9 spirit shadows technique soon after he had consumed 100 million primary spirit dawn. After all, he didn't have a large amount of primary spirit dawn. He only had enough primary spirit dawn for summoning the Star Colossus avatar once apart from his own requirement for cultivation and Yi Mo's requirement to promote to a great sage tool. He could summon the Star Colossus avatar just once in this devil world where danger lurked in every corner. So, his safety had undoubtedly reduced enormously. Yi Shiwen was deeply concerned with the shortage of primary spirit dawn. So, he planned to plunder wealth from the bodies of the numerous devil beasts present in the devil world. Many of these devils had been alive since 100 years or even 1,000 years. So, they must have gathered a lot of wealth. They would especially possess magic crystal stones. These stones might not be too precious for other people. After all, they would need to follow several troublesome procedures to transform them into usable spirit stones. However, Yi Shiwen could absorb this wealth directly. So, it could be said that the magic crystal stones and the primary spirit dawn were the same for him. He didn't need any matrix formation to transform them. Yi Shiwen went deeper into the devil world. It was like following the path of one's own doom for ordinary human experts because their auras could attract many coveting devil experts. It could be said that the exuberant vitality of the humans was like the brightest lamp for attracting the devils in this wilderness. In fact, the higher-ups in both the devil world and the true martial world had mutually agreed not to send their formidable experts of older generations here. However, they could venture till the boundary of this desolate area without any hesitation. Therefore, many experts didn't want to leave the boundary of the desolate zone. However, it was no big deal for Yi Shiwen. After all, he needed to attract those devils, kill them, and plunder their wealth. He had also cultivated his restraining breath technique to an extremely profound condition by now. Therefore, he could disguise into a devil for as long as he wanted to. Nobody could recognize him. That's why he had dared to go into the depths of the devil world without any hesitation. Ling Fei had strongly opposed this idea. After all, she had spent so much time and money in order to escape from inside. However, she had to once again go inside now. This was extremely depressing for her. However, she couldn't change Yi Ziwen's mind in the end, and went with him into the depths of the devil world. Yi Shiwen was flying in the sky above the devil world after having transformed into a streamer of light. He had set his aura free without any hesitation. His surging vitality quite quickly attracted a devil. Yi Shiwen, there's a devil up ahead. Ling Fei warned him. However, Ling Fei didn't need to remind him since he had already sensed the aura of that devil. That devil had completely released his aura without any hesitation, as if he didn't care about getting discovered by Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen was leagues above him when it came to being arrogant. He was the only human being in the domain of the devil world who would unscrupulously set his aura free in order to attract those devil experts. He was simply reckless. Human, you're quite courageous. I've heard that you've come for the so-called devil world competition. You've dared to consider us devils as objects to train yourself. I don't know whether you're arrogant or dumb. That devil expert arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. He was clad in armor. He looked insolent. He looked down on Yi Shiwen. He believed that Yi Shiwen was just a nonentity of sage accomplished realm. Yi Shiwen wouldn't be regarded as a powerful person even in the ranks of human experts. He thought that Yi Shiwen might have lost his way and come to this place. In fact, Yi Shiwen had already come far away from the competition zone. He was still at the boundary of the desolate zone. However, only a few human experts would come out here. This human had now appeared here to deliver merit points into his hands. True martial world allotted merit points to their experts for killing devil experts. But the devil race also had a corresponding system. This human of sage accomplished realm has brought big benefits for me. I'll obtain corresponding merit points on killing him. Moreover, my martial power will rise after swallowing him. I can also rob his wealth. I've gotten many things at once. Stupid! Yi Shiwen just spat out this word. Then, he looked at this devil who seemed to have cultivated till the late stage of half-step great sage realm. This devil expert's martial power was extremely profound. It was clear that he had been in the late stage of half-step great sage realm for many years now. The difference between sage realm and great sage realm was as massive as the separation between heaven and earth. However, this wasn't true just for the humans. It was the same for the devils. There was no exception. He might not be able to cross the threshold of the great sage realm in his entire life if he didn't come across special adventures. The lifespan of the devils was obviously inherently far more than that of humans. So, they also had more opportunities of becoming great sage than humans. This devil didn't know that he was considering Yi Shiwen as his bloody meal. However, Yi Shiwen believed that the devil was a huge supplement for him. He could completely transform his blood essence into the energy that he required with the help of the heavenly source mirror. Fu, your death is near at hand. Still, you are retorting strongly. That devil expert burst into laughter. His laughter sounded like the voice of an old crow. It was hoarse and unpleasant to hear. That devil attacked amid his weird laughter. His palm transformed into a sky-obscuring hand and swept out towards Yi Shiwen. His palm was pitch black just like charcoal. However, it was still emitting a trace of luster. He had already cultivated this claw technique to an extremely profound state. It seemed as if this attack would break the world. Audacious! Yi Shiwen sneered. It would have been very difficult for Yi Shiwen to deal with a devil expert of the late stage of half-step great sage realm if it had happened earlier. However, it was nothing for the current Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen didn't conceal his aura. On the contrary, he had set it free ostentatiously in order to attract idiots like this devil. Yi Shiwen stretched out his hand. And it transformed into a big flaming hand. The fire clouds falling sky hand swept out and collided with that massive devil hand. Bang! Yi Ziwen's fire clouds falling sky hand instantly extinguished that devil hand. Consequently, it became obvious that these two weren't on the same level. Yi Ziwen's strength was already above this devil expert. Moreover, this devil expert's big hand had been condensed merely from the ordinary devil energies present in the environment. So, how could it have contended against Yi Ziwen's fire clouds falling sky hand? How can he be so powerful? that devil expert said as he saw that Yi Shiwen had destroyed his big hand in an instant. He had obviously come to know by now that Yi Shiwen was way more powerful than him. That devil expert turned around and escaped without any hesitation immediately after this probing attack. He hadn't used his entire strength. However, he certainly didn't want to use his entire strength now after he had seen Yi Ziwen's unfazed appearance. He had realized that it would have made no difference if he had tried. Yi Shiwen was a bit surprised by this. After all, he hadn't expected that this devil expert would run away so quickly. He had changed his mind quite quickly. He had escaped immediately after coming to know that he wasn't a match for Yi Shiwen. It was rare to see such cowardly devils nowadays. It was hard to say whether this devil was aware of where he stood or he was simply a coward. Anyway, how could Yi Shiwen let him go? He pierced his palm with his 5 fingers, and his fist transformed into a huge star and smashed down. Bang! Yi Ziwen's fist pressure entrapped that devil expert just like a prison and transformed him into a mass of blood fog. Then, the heavenly source mirror absorbed the blood fog and transformed it into primary essence. After that, Yi Shiwen absorbed that primary essence. That devil expert's wealth exploded out in a split second, and all of it got grabbed by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen calculated it roughly. It was approximately 30 million primary spirit dawn worth of wealth. This wasn't much for Yi Shiwen. However, he wasn't a bit dissatisfied as many little drops would make an ocean. He didn't hesitate even a bit after he thought of this. The pair of devil wings unfolded behind his body, and he quickly disappeared into the horizon. Ling Fei just shook her head. She was bored. She looked all around the place, bit her lips, and followed him. She also transformed into a streamer of light and disappeared into the horizon. Chapter 624. They want to fight? Then they shall have it. Yi Shiwen went on a plundering spree without any hesitation after he had obtained the sweet taste of success for the first time. His attention was fixed on the many formidable devil experts in the depths of the wilderness. None of the experts on whom his attention landed could escape his vicious attack. Yi Ziwen's name had begun to spread gradually among the devils. Especially, those devil experts who wanted to obtain benefits in this devil world competition were afraid of Yi Ziwen's vicious methods now. Most of the experts whom Yi Shiwen had chosen to rob were young elites in the devil world. All of them were the most elite bunch of late-stage half-step great sage level experts. There were also some Heaven's Pride devil experts among them. However, they couldn't turn out to be a match for Yi Shiwen. All of them got killed by him eventually. Meanwhile, Yi Ziwen's pocket had gradually bulged out. His wealth had once again surpassed 1 billion primary spirit dawn. His current wealth couldn't be compared with his earlier wealth. However, it was still pretty good. He could at least summon the Star Colossus avatar more than once now. So, he was quite pleased with this progress. His pocket had gotten swelled up gradually. Meanwhile, his cultivation had also promoted little by little. He could barely defeat an ordinary Heaven's Pride expert back then. However, an ordinary Heaven's Pride expert was no match for him now. In fact, he could defeat a Heaven's Pride expert of Shou Kun's level now. This was a huge progress. Shou Kun had had approximately 1,000 years of accumulation. This feat couldn't be matched in a matter of years. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had made quick progress depending upon the support of huge amounts of primary spirit dawn. He had also had to temper himself by making himself go through life and death battles. Yi Shiwen had chosen these young devil experts to attack. Naturally, it wasn't that easy for him. He had thrilling experiences many a times. After all, those young devil experts weren't the kind of people who would sit and wait for death. They had also launched counterattacks many times and had set up ambushes in order to encircle and kill Yi Shiwen. Even Yi Shiwen had to escape after a bloody battle despite the fact that he possessed such cultivation. He himself had sustained serious injuries. In fact, he had almost been forced to summon the Star Colossus avatar. So, one could well imagine how intense this battle must have been. However, this wasn't the most intense fight that Yi Shiwen had come across. The most intense fight had taken place between him and a Heaven's Pride expert of the devil race. That Heaven's Pride devil expert had been quite exceptional. Yi Shiwen would have a blitzkrieg strategy for everything. However, he had had to fight with this devil expert for a day and a night before he could finally kill him. That fight had led to a bloodbath. That Heaven's Pride devil expert had been nearly exhausted when he had been killed by Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen had also sustained serious injuries. In fact, not a single part of his body had been in good condition afterwards. Therefore, he had had no choice but to rest for an entire month before finally recovering. These two were the most thrilling battles that Yi Shiwen had been involved in. However, the other fights could also be rated as fierce and hard-fought. The quality of these young devil experts was very high. Moreover, the true martial world's forces had turned out here in full strength. So, how could these young devil experts not have done the same? Their number was far beyond people's imagination. Yi Shiwen had dared to fight with these young devil experts all alone. Any other person in his place would have already been killed by them. It was simply impossible to contend against them for so long. Those young devil experts had become aware that there was a ferocious and lunatic boy among the humans. They also knew that he was in the territory where they used to operate all year around. So, they had encircled him many times. However, they had failed to kill him. Finally, the devil experts classified him as an unrivaled opponent. However, this news wasn't publicly known yet. After all, the devil experts felt that it was a matter of extraordinary shame and humiliation for them. They wouldn't have minded if Yi Shiwen had been an expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm. After all, there wasn't any certainty about who could be the king in the same realm. There could be one or many. Nobody could predict this. However, Yi Shiwen was only an expert of the sage accomplished realm. He differed by 3 small levels from the experts of late stage of half-step Great Sage realm. In fact, several devil experts wanted to commit suicide because of this. After all, how could this not be a matter of extraordinary shame and humiliation for them? They wanted to take revenge one day and wash off this disgrace from their heads. Therefore, this news hadn't been transmitted to the human side. Otherwise, it would have set off an uproar. There had been only a few people in the past who had obtained the title of an unrivaled opponent. For example, Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie, who had participated in the Devil World competition back in the day, were well-known figures among such people. These title holders of unrivaled opponent had become infamous in the entire world. That's because they had single-handedly killed the devil experts, turned them into a complete mess, and caused a bloodbath. Time passed day by day. The Devil World competition had entered the most intense stage now. Several experts had penetrated deeper into the Devil World. It could only be considered as the periphery of the desolate zone in comparison to the entire Devil World. However, several young devil experts had acted as soon as they had gotten the news. The news of the death of a Heaven's Pride expert could be heard almost every day. Those rarely seen Heaven's Pride experts had suddenly become an everyday sight. They were falling one after another. The battle situation had become extremely intense. A large number of human experts had died. However, the condition of the devil race wasn't good either. They had also suffered a great loss. This place had become like a huge mill of flesh and blood. The Heaven's Pride experts who were considered as peerless geniuses earlier were nothing here. They could die at any time. More and more young devil experts had arrived from various places of Devil World after they had obtained the news. The devil clans whom the experts of the true martial world had rarely seen had arrived one after another in front of everyone now. There were 8 big devil clans. They were the main clans. Also, there were others who were the members of some rarely seen devil clans. They might not be members of any of the 8 major clans. However, the strength of those devil experts couldn't be despised either. It was an overwhelming battle. It was a bloodbath. Countless experts of both parties had died. However, those who had survived must have obtained enormous experience. They had suffered disastrous losses. However, it was also worth it. Those who had survived could make enormous breakthroughs. All of them could become elites in the future. It was a huge loss for those big forces who would pursue a genius over 1,000 mediocre experts. However, they could still tolerate it. Time passed day by day by day. The fight between the devils and the humans had become more and more intense. However, the powerful force that was leading the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa hadn't given up the idea of encircling and killing Yi Shiwen. They had unceasingly issued big statements. They wanted Yi Shiwen to surrender himself. They had also unceasingly put out baits in order to lure and deceive Yi Shiwen. It's just that Yi Shiwen didn't appear. He took advantage of the critical situation of the youths of devil race and unceasingly killed those devil experts. He didn't care about the fact that he was considered as an unrivaled opponent by those young devil experts. He himself would go and pick a fight with them if they didn't provoke him. He would do so in order to temper himself and fill his pockets. It wasn't that he didn't know about the movements of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the others. However, he couldn't take out time to deal with them. This whole chaotic situation continued for half-year. The Devil World competition of this time was approaching its end now. It was about to end after a few more months. Everyone must return to the true martial world no matter how much profit they had obtained or whether they had earned any profit or not. This was the mutual agreement between both sides. Therefore, it was impossible to continue the Devil World competition any further. In a remote mountain range, Yi Shiwen stretched out his big hand, grabbed a devil expert of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm, and crushed him. Then, his flesh and essence was thoroughly absorbed by him. Is Devil World competition finally going to end? Yi Shiwen sighed. He had obtained many benefits in this Devil World competition. Therefore, he wasn't happy that the Devil World competition was ending. It's finally ending. Great. I can finally go to the human world now. Yi Shiwen was a bit sad. However, Ling Fei was very happy. She had been with Yi Shiwen for almost a year. She had already gotten bored of staying here. She might have left due to impatience if she hadn't been promised by Yi Shiwen that he would take her to the human world. Yi Shiwen looked at Ling Fei jumping in joy like a small girl in the distance. He couldn't help but reveal a smiling expression. He had learnt everything about Ling Fei after interacting with her for more than a year's time. She was like a small and immature girl since the beginning. She possessed outstanding strength. However, she hadn't matured mentally. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen felt a profound fragrance coming from behind him and entering his nose. Then, a pair of arms hooped around his neck like two snow-white roots of lotus. After that, Ling Fei's joyous laughter entered his ears. She was a simple-minded and naive person. She had thought that she should be good towards Yi Shiwen since Yi Shiwen had been good towards her in the last 1 year. She didn't consider him as an outsider anymore. Yi Shiwen could feel the pressure of that pair of plump bunnies on his back. He couldn't help but be startled as a result. He immediately regained his calm. Ling Fei had already gone somewhere else jumping. He saw her running madly as far as he could see. The entire mountain forest reverberated with the vigorous roars of devil beasts. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't a bit worried for Ling Fei. He should rather be worried for those devil beasts. The vigorous roars of those devil beasts soon transformed into screams just like it was expected. This sister looked very cute. However, she had always been a ferocious devil. So, provoking her wasn't a good idea. Yi Shiwen felt numb in his scalp as he thought of the day when he had met her for the first time. She had almost killed him that day. Fortunately, he had reacted quickly. Otherwise, he would have been killed by her. Then, he wouldn't have had any place where he could go and cry. Yi Shiwen let out an enormous smile from the corner of his mouth after he heard Ling Fei's unscrupulous laughter. It seemed as if all of his worries had vanished on hearing Ling Fei's simple-minded laughter. However, the smile on his face suddenly vanished. His complexion turned ice-cold as he thought of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and the 10,000 Beasts Villa who were clamoring that they would chase and kill him. He was also thinking about some other people who had evil intentions for him. He hadn't had enough time to go and settle them earlier. These guys thought that he was weak. That's why they were clamoring even more loudly. They were also making noise on the rumor that he didn't dare to fight. Yi Shiwen let out a sneer from the corner of his mouth, They want to fight. So I shall give it to them. I.e. she when am coming back. They are tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.